details here, but it has been the fastest development of a pharmaceutical from start of the activities to registration. I think in the history of the pharma industry, in 10 months we got the first approval, and have ever since then been very successful, as I mentioned before, in delivering these doses all around the globe. As I mentioned, we have now delivered 3.4 billion doses, and one important aspect that came with this is upscaling, and we have made risky investments also during the course of 2020, as it was not known if the product would be successful. We invested in a further, we bought a manufacturing site from Novartis in Marburg, which is now having capacity of manufacturing up to 3 billion doses of mRNA drug substance as of this year. We are further expanding our manufacturing footprint in Asia, and we have now rolled out a manufacturing concept called biocontainers, which are manufacturing modules for manufacturing in Africa and South America. And each of these biocontainers can supply up to 50 or 100 million doses each. So manufacturing has been a key focus and has also been a benefit of the, let's say, experience through COVID-19 by establishing this global manufacturing network. So where we are right now, infectious disease, you saw the first deal that we did with Pfizer in 2018. At that time, infectious disease was something that we knew we could do, and we have licensed for one indication, influenza, to Pfizer, our technology, our mRNA technology. Now that the technology is proven and is actually a marketed product, we are further expanding our infectious disease capabilities, and we are targeting multiple diseases right now, which are listed here. Together with Pfizer, we're working on flu, we're working on COVID-19, of course, and we're working on shingles. The company has a very large effort in malaria, actually, which we're pushing forward, and we're working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on HIV and TB, which are key programs to the company. And you just heard in connection with our push to establish manufacturing in Africa, these efforts are very synergistic. In parallel, in oncology, we have been setting out to, as I mentioned before, revolutionize the way cancer is treated, with a focus on highly, let's say, personalized therapies and individualized therapies. Of course, the proceeds that I just mentioned very much go into running our oncology clinical trials and also expanding the company so that we are fully enabled to also run oncology registrational trials. And as an outlook to where we are right now, I mean, I've shared, first of all, I think the success that we had in 2020, 2021 established mRNA as a validated new drug class via the COVID-19 vaccine. We are currently using mRNA to further establish this drug modality and to bring the next product to market within our oncology portfolio with a number of approaches that we are driving here, which I can't go into detail now. We added on antibacterials on top of the as part of the anti-infectives portfolio, targeting viral diseases. So oncology and infectious diseases is something we're focused on very much today. But in the future, and this is what we're already preparing as part of our discovery efforts, we see the application of mRNA much broader, and this is where we are investing into right now to also add other indications or therapeutic areas to BioNTech's portfolio, with the aim to become a fully established, fully integrated European biopharma business. And I think just an outlook maybe to the panel discussions we'll be on later, that will be happening later on also, where I'll be participating. As I mentioned to you before, we really have used partnering and collaborations to build a company, to generate non-dilutive income, to drive our clinical pipeline, and we continue to do so in the future. Although from a business development perspective, of course, the tables have turned now, and I think we'll speak to that later in more detail, that of course we're in a position now, in a luxurious position, that we don't really need big pharma partners anymore to drive our portfolio, but can do so by basically taking the seat on the other side of the table and looking at companies to acquire now. So with that final slide, I will close my presentation, and I want to thank you for listening and hand over back to Jordanis.
Real pleasure, Holger. Your slide with the collaboration is like a panorama of what one can achieve and what can dream of. I'd like to make very quick comments. The following. First of all, thank you for encouraging our people and everybody else, I guess, to continue publishing. This is very important. Thank you for confirming that it's always the important thing is the science behind, and if you have good sciences, all the rest can be complemented, or all the rest you can find a good express. I'm very glad with those statements there. I'd like to thank publicly also Son Maret, the Chief Business Officer of BioNTech, who has accepted, I hope, same for you, to help us with the portfolio of cell and gene therapy companies that we have as our advisor. And we're really grateful to that. And this is the way to go forward for Europe, and be able to have your advice, your opinion, your experience is great for our companies. Please keep on asking questions at Slido, and that will be answered later on.
Sorry, just now that you mentioned it, we have already one first question, but as you mentioned, we will keep, now I take the chance to tell all the audience that we'll keep these questions for the questions and answer session at the end of the speakers. So
very good. And with this impressive presentation by Holger, I'd like to move on to Carles Monterrubio, who is with us. Carles is, I would call him, among the rising stars in licensing. He has seen portfolios at leading institutions, U.S. institutions on the East Coast, including Cornell, MIT, and because of his talents and quality, he has now been recruited by J&J, and he's the associate director, if I remember correctly, if I recall, of innovation. Carles, over to you.
Thank you, Danny, for the introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here as a panelist today. So thank you, everyone, really. And this is Carlos Monterrubio, and as Jordani said, I'm a business development professional working on the life sciences innovation space. And less than 2 months ago, actually less than 3 months ago now, I joined J&J as an associate director of business development, working mainly on the early innovation partnering side. And this is the agenda for today. I will very quickly provide a quick introduction of myself so you know where I'm coming from. Then I will briefly, very briefly describe what tech transfer is really about. And I will actually focus about 40% of my presentation on a few case studies, which is what Jordanis and the team asked me to do today, actually. So I initiated my scientific training. I do have a scientific background, doing my PhD at the Barcelona Children's Hospital, and then I continued with my postdoctoral training in New York at the Sloan Kettering. I was working on the drug delivery space, generating basically new drug delivery systems for the treatment of cancer, first in pediatric patients and then in adults. Outside of my lab experience, I gained some commercialization experience joining the tech transfer offices, first at Mount Sinai, then at Cornell University, while I was still at New York. And after that, I went to a full-time position in tech transfer at the MIT Tech Transfer Office. I was there for about, I think, a couple of years. And after that, I moved from the sales side or outbound side, doing mostly out licensing, to the in-licensing side of external innovation. And at Cell Signaling, an antibody company, I was almost 3 years there. And as I said, I just started a new position, also focused on the external innovation side at Johnson & Johnson. So it's important to know that most of my experience, both on the inbound and the outbound sides, were actually, encompassing mostly relationships with very early innovators, whether they were in the academic stage, or stealth mode companies, or even startups in the very early stages. So sorry about that. Okay, so I don't know what's going on. Tech transfer. So tech transfer, there is a very simple definition of tech transfer. And before I jump into the cases, I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aligned here. So basically, tech transfer means taking intellectual property generated at institution A and putting basically a structure in place, a contract, a relationship to transfer this IP from institution A to institution B. But the common misconception, and I hear this all the time, is that tech transfer is only done from academic institutions to for-profit companies, whether these are pharma or biotechs, but that's not true. Tech transfer is the process by which any for-profit or not-for-profit institutions allow someone else, another institution, to use that intellectual property, usually in exchange for a financial benefit. But as you know, it can be also, as part of a collaboration without any, cash flow either in or out for any of the companies. But keep in mind that, it can involve academics, for-profit, not-for-profit companies. So going quickly to the first case, and before I do, I wanted to share that I curated the following cases so that they each represent a different type of intellectual property, and they're also at different stages of development. So you get to see different examples, basically, of how the terms are based depending on the technology and the stage and the kind of IP. Also importantly is basically who is the licensee. It's different when you have a licensee who is a huge pharma, they're very well established, they have the cash, or whether you're treating with a startup company where, usually if they're very early on, they're still struggling with funding, maybe they don't have a strong management team, maybe they do, but those are considerations that we have to keep in mind when coming out with the terms of the agreement. So this first one is a preclinical drug candidate for the treatment of cancer. This is an asset. In this case, the unmet need was basically that this team discovered a novel target that was potentially druggable, but there were no specific drugs out there for this target in the market. So this team developed the first drug for this target that was very specific. In theory, it didn't have any off-site toxicity. And the bioavailability that they show at the tumor site was pretty high, and the efficacy was really good. So when we were talking to this potential partner, who was a big pharma, when considering the different terms, we looked at the potential competition. Being this a novel target that was just described a couple of years before, we saw that potential competition could arise, but not earlier than 3 to 5 years, potentially even longer than that. This team was still in the preclinical stage, but was doing pretty good in terms of getting close to IND enabling studies. They were already working with different rodent mice and rats and all that. And they were about to file for IND studies as well. So the IP status in this case is that they only submitted a provisional patent application. It was still in the PCT stage, not granted in any country. In fact, when we were talking to this pharma company, the provisional patent application was just filed 2 or 3 months before that. Because of all of this, these things, especially considering that it's a big pharma and considering the stage of development, the main financial considerations for this license that we proposed to the partner was an upfront cash payment, which has to be done upon execution of the agreement, of $40 million. The royalties in this case were 1.75%. For those of you that are not familiar with the royalty amounts, I mean, we always use comps, and at the end of the day, something is worth as much as someone else is willing to pay. But on average, for drug candidates at this stage, you usually ask between 1% and 3%. But to be honest, I've seen 6, 7%. So it happens. Don't be surprised about that. In terms of sublicensing rights, we did allow the partner to sublicense the IP for certain fields, and the rate they were asking for them was 15% for any sublicensing income back to our company. And in terms of milestones, I'm just showing here a few ones. The list goes on and on. It's pretty long. But basically, we were asking that after each regulatory approval for each region, they would pay us $5 million. After the first commercial sale in each region, they would pay us $10 million. When cumulative sales reach in each region $100 million, they would pay 10% of that, so $10 million. And when global cumulative sales reach 1 billion, they would pay 50 million back to the company. The second case is actually a medical device. So we're moving from a drug candidate to the health tech or kind of side of things. In this case, it's a diagnostic device, and what the team that developed the IP tried to accomplish here was focusing on cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. They wanted to make sure that they were monitored over time for potential side effects that could basically affect their immune system and catch those imbalances early on so that we could tweak the chemotherapy treatments on those patients before they become seriously immunocompromised. Up until now, what it's usually done is that those patients have to go every now and then and check, they take a blood draw and they check the leukocytes on the system, but they already go usually for infusions to the, to the doctor's office. What you want is for them to be able to stay at home, rest, which is what they need, and make sure that they take continuous, sometimes even with this device, several times a day, several readings, so that you can see how the leukocytes are affected over time with the treatment. This was an IP that was at a more advanced stages, while the last one was still in preclinical stage. This one had enough data actually for regulatory filing, and it was pretty close to commercialization. In terms of competition, there are some competitors out there working in similar devices, but everything that's out there so far had a lower detail in terms of diagnosis, and the ease of use for the patient was not quite there. And that's also important when you think about it, because if the patient doesn't know how to use a device, you can either get wrong readings, or the patient just discontinues doing that, and you don't want that. The key of this device is that the PCP or the oncologist can follow up the patient over time. They get all the information through a cloud-based system, and again, they can tweak very quickly the treatment as the need arises. In this case, in terms of IP, there was copyright protection and patent protection already in place, including the industrial design of the device itself. And the licensee was a startup with a strong management team that included some of the scientists that developed the IP, so they actually knew what this was about and how to make it work, and a couple of serial entrepreneurs with experience in other companies in the space. So because of that, in this case, we are not talking. I hear some feedback in the background. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you. So in this case, the upfront payment was half of the one that I showed before, just $20 million. That happens many times when you're talking about medical devices instead of drug candidates, but at the same time, you also ask for higher royalties, as you can see, 4.5% in this case. Because this was a startup company, they didn't have funding just yet. For those 20 million that they should pay upfront, we were not asking for cash payments. We actually accepted equity because of the company stage, and that equity actually went into non-dilutive basis up to $5 million, meaning that after they reach 5 million in investment, then we would dilute like everyone else. Sub-licensing income, again, 15%, which is pretty standard. And for milestones, we also arranged the structure by regions, as you can see, but the amounts are lower than before. So for regulatory approval for each region, 1 million, commercial sale in each region, 2 million, cumulative sales for each region. When they reach 30 million, they would pay 2 million to the company. And then for global cumulative sales, when they reach 100, instead of 50 million, sorry, instead of 10 million like before, it would be just 5 million. Yet a different case here. So we went through a drug candidate, then we went to a medical device. Now we're talking about a platform in this case, also in the oncology space. This is basically a nanoparticle delivery system, targeted delivery system actually, which was a threat agnostic because those nanoparticles were able to both encapsulate the drug of interest, and also on the outer shell of the nanoparticle, they had some fluorophores that allowed to localize the nanoparticles within the organism once they were injected. So the unmet need was, like with brain tumors and many other brain malignancies, is crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is this tight barrier that you have between the vasculature in your brain and the brain tissue. And the efficient delivery of molecules to the brain is very, very complicated. And I was actually just at ASCO at the beginning of this month. And amongst all the posters and presentations I saw, I haven't seen anything impressive yet when it comes down to having something close to commercialization or commercialized that can really penetrate the blood-brain barrier and treat efficiently the tumors in the brain tissue. So this team was working towards that. We know that there is potential competition. There are a lot of academic labs working on that. But as I said, so far, we haven't seen anything that is really crossing that blood-brain barrier, having very selective targeting, and not having absolutely any outside retention or toxicity. The stage of development, when we were talking to the licensee, they were going through IND studies with some promising data, but there was still some more to do. At that time, I believe it was about 6 months more of work was expected. They were going through biodistribution and tox studies, basically. The IP status at that time was a provisional patent application, just similar to what I said before, nothing granted in any region just yet. And the licensee was, again, a startup that just incorporated and only had $300,000 in funding from a seed round from a couple of VCs. So because of that, the main financial considerations in this case were an upfront fee of 10 million, because this is a very, very risky platform. And the chances of success are actually low, as history shows us in this space. And again, because this was a startup company and didn't have much funding, that was in the form of equity and on a non-dilutive basis up to 3 million. Royalties were again 4.5%. So licensing income was a little bit lower in this case, 12%. And the milestone structure was a little bit easier in this case, also focused in different regions, but we had less milestones that they had to meet. So in the first place, for the first regulatory approval on each region, we're asking for 1 million for each. For the first commercial sale in each region, only 2 million. And the global cumulative sales, when they reach 300 million, they would have to pay 15 million back to the licensor. And this is a final case. I wanted to show you what a research tool may look like in terms of licensing, because most of the companies will have to license a research tool, at some stage. In this case, we're talking about a mouse model for cancer, and it was actually the first mouse model, humanized mouse model of a specific cancer type that I cannot disclose here. It was the first of its kind, and was very sought after by many pharma and biotech companies once it was released to the public. We didn't find any potential competition at that time, but it's very well possible that any other academic lab was working on that, or being a mouse model, companies like Jackson Labs or anything like that, they could actually be developing something similar that wouldn't necessarily conflict with the IP that our team developed. In terms of development, it was fully developed at the time that we started licensing this out. And for many research tools, we usually don't seek patent protection. And by research tools, you can think about buffers, antibodies for research use only, mouse models, cell lines, and the like. Usually, it's not worth spending money on protecting these, because there is always a way around, and developing something very similar that works in the same way. Because this is a research tool, we wouldn't license it exclusively to any company. So we just license to anyone with the same terms and conditions on a non-exclusive basis so that they can use them. And these were the upfront fees, so just $50,000 in this case. You can see there is a huge step down. Royalties only 0.7%, and only if they're using the model for drug development. And there is no sub-licensing income or any milestone fees that they would have to pay.
Dear Carlos, I'm afraid we have to leave it.
I'm done. Yeah, this was the last slide.
Okay. Thank you so much for showing details of structure. I mean, this was very, very useful. Just for the sake of time, thank you so much, Carlos, for the details in presenting your cases. We got to move on, and our next presenter is John Cosmopoulos. If I look at, and John has a lot of experience with structuring, developing deals, closing deals. It comes from Tufts University with a tremendous track record behind. So, John, the floor is yours. John, you're muted.
Okay, now I believe I'm unmuted, correct?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm gonna try sharing again. So I'm John Cosmopoulos. I work in technology transfer at Tufts University. I'm a scientist, a business development person. I've worked in the US, in Boston in particular, in Canada, as well as Greece. And I'm going to give you a short presentation on that hopes to answer a few key questions about licensing. It's sort of how is a licensing job done, and in particular, some new models and tools that we're using. How do we get deals done? How do we get more deals done? How do technology transfer professionals and offices add value to the licensing process and the startup formation? And I'll give you a few case examples that can hopefully give you some ideas as to why some companies succeed. I mean, some university startup companies succeed and why some fail. So I've already given you the overview of my presentation, the evolving tech transfer business model, and some success stories. But I simply want to highlight here one important point is that how we define success. And we define success as to making our inventions, we at Tufts University, making our inventions and discoveries available for public benefit and to promote research at Tufts University. One of the missions is to generate income, but that's not our primary objective. So what are some new ideas that we're adopting to make technology transfer sort of more effective and more successful in our own particular shop? So we really have to adopt the mindset of being business development professionals. And so in evaluating projects, we have to understand the market opportunity in some detail. We have to develop business cases. It's important to develop business cases because that then leads into the next aspect of building strong patent portfolios. We want to file patent applications not for the sake of them or to have more patent applications in the appendix, but we want the patents to claim the future products. And so for that, we have to be able to envision what are those future products. We need to file in the right jurisdictions. You would file differently for a medical device and different jurisdictions for a pharmaceutical. We want to build defensive walls around our portfolio. We want to help support startup formation. And we've gone as far as engaging, of course, we engage our own law firms, but engaging law firms that will support our faculty entrepreneurs and help them ease the process. We want to connect entrepreneurs and experienced industry professionals to our opportunities, and as well as our faculty entrepreneurs who are looking for a startup. Again, the focus here is connect, connect, connect. We've expanded our business, and this is, you'll find is pretty common in a number of U.S. universities around research business development. Some tech transfer offices will call it corporate engagement. It goes by various names, but essentially the idea here is to, in fact, start the technology transfer process at an earlier stage, where the starting point is industry-sponsored research. And then you have a situation where you have the IP formation and a licensing deal sort of all done in one. This area requires careful mentoring of the faculty, of the scientists, on how to themselves act as sort of business developers or research business developers and alliance managers, so that they can manage the interactions. Often these interactions happen at conferences. It also requires sort of different kind of staff that might handle the regular tech transfer activities, sort of staff with deep domain expertise to manage the interactions. And of course, also once we have a successful deal, to manage the ensuing alliance. And it helps the overall research enterprise, because the scientists who are involved in these industry-sponsored research agreements gain pretty useful experience that can then feed back into their basic research activities. We have broadened our mandate to capture what we've been referring to as non-traditional IP. And so here we're endeavoring to commercialize opportunities around soft IP, not just the sort of the drugs, the devices, what have you. But some examples from my portfolio involve nutritional scoring tools, educational tools, educational accomplishment measurement tools, all of which can lead to opportunities and exciting either licenses or startup companies. We've been looking into new models to monetize and ultimately commercialize data developed by our researchers. In this space, I've looked into forming business partnerships with other groups that are operating in the same space. So, for example, the example I mentioned before of the educational attainment measurement tools, I'm sort of working on you might even call it a joint venture with our scientist and a technology company that can provide a technology platform to use with the Tufts educational tool. And ultimately here, around non-traditional IP, the objective is to create new sort of social business opportunities and to, of course, as always, to increase the research impact. So the people, we have to hire and train the right people. The people have to be entrepreneurial. They have to be startup mentors. They have to be resourceful, think outside the box, have multiple skill sets, of course, work in complex teams, balance strong domain expertise with a generalist approach. They have to be well connected, or they'll become so. They have to, this I guess goes to thinking outside the box. They have to understand industry concerns, be capable of closing deals. And by coincidence, these are the same people that are hired by industry. In terms of staff, again, people continued. We've hired specialized staff to help us be more proactive, be more agile, and close more deals. We have an in-house patent attorney, in-house transactional attorney. We have some domain experts that we've hired for specific projects. We also have been more active in using external consultants. We formed in the past, we formed an advisory board for the entire office. We also have, and I'll mention this later, we have a proof of principle funding program that which uses the acronym TLA. And so the advisors on the TLA can also provide broader support on a project-by-project basis. And we've used specialized consultants and advisors, for example, medicinal chemistry consultants, translational scientists, ex-industry executives, entrepreneurs in residence. We had one for 3 years running. We use a venture mentor, and numerous tech transfer offices have explored ways to use their alumni, who are, of course, people working or have these various kinds of skill sets I mentioned before, but have the additional benefit of having a strong connection to the institution as various kinds of advisors. In terms of financial support, in 2019, we as in Tufts launched a proof of concept funding program, which we called Tufts Launchpad Accelerator, TLA. A number of tech transfer offices have various kinds of proof of concept funding. It's now sort of clearly essential to be able to move technologies down towards commercialization. It's an enormously useful tool to help develop data that is essential to for commercialization. An example would be we had a medical device that was sort of showed proof of concept, but it was too large. In order to be used, it had to be miniaturized, and so that's an example of a TLA project to take a large device, miniaturize it as a way of making it into a real-world product. We're in the planning stages of our own seed fund, where we would make equity investments in startups. In terms of financial support, we've been also using our existing resources creatively. So we have a generous patent budget. We recently had a project that was not additional IP and decided that IP is IP, and that our patent budget is actually an IP budget. So the money we might have spent towards a patent application, we spent it towards on a branding exercise, and ultimately resulted in sort of a brand concept, trademark, and so on. And of course, in terms of financial, we connect to various kinds of industry and government programs. Space is important, sort of a novel concept in terms of how do we do this better. We've developed new kinds of spaces, meeting rooms, co-working spaces that are available on demand. That's particularly helpful for student entrepreneurs, and they're a rich resource for startups. In 2018, we launched an incubator space in collaboration with the biolabs. And so Biolabs manages that space. The model is the bench on demand model, month by month. And it's been so successful beyond our expectations that we plan to double the TLV space. We're building a new innovation building, and in fact, we will have only a small portion of the building, and we plan to lease the space to other players in the innovation ecosystem. And the idea is to increase interactions around innovation. We're also even planning to lease space in the medical school to biotech companies. This would be more space and longer term leases, but again, the idea is to increase interactions around innovation. The more interactions, the better is our idea. So we have a number of successes in our portfolio, but the key questions are not to highlight our successes per se, but to answer these questions as to what makes a deal possible, what makes for long-term success. We have a number of commercialized products that we're quite proud of, therapeutics, in devices, the Illumina bead array in diagnostics, in educational tools, software, robotics. Since 1996, we've had, this is our experience at Tufts University, over 71 startups. And this is a partial list from 2013 to 21. One of our biggest successes, actually no, our biggest success is our license with Illumina. Illumina is now, despite sort of the current stock market, it's a very large, very large market cap. It's a Tufts startup company. It was formed based on Tufts technology, the bead array technology I mentioned before. The license was signed originally in 1998. It was amended a few times. The company developed the fiber optic bead array platform for microarray systems for gene analysis. It became very successful. It then expanded into other products, into next generation sequencing platforms. These are not Tufts IP. And it found even greater success in that space. And so as of the day when I wrote this, it was a $50 billion market cap company. It's a biotech, leader in the biotech tool space. Tufts made money from the sale of around 8 million of Illumina equity when it went public in 2001, and has received $40–50 million in royalty income. It remains our big success. But the key thing here is the relationship required careful management over the years, which in turn requires in-house expertise to manage that relationship. And it's much more than just waiting for the checks. A company in the Alzheimer's space, GliaCure, it was a technology based on the research observation that a tool compound targeting glial cells clears amyloid plaque. We as a Tufts invested in technology development funds to engage a medicinal chemistry consultant to design novel analogs and engage a CRO to make the compounds. The data was excellent. The Tufts scientists formed a company, raised over 10 million angel financing and foundation support from the Alzheimer's Drug Development Foundation. in record time, which means maybe perhaps not a record compared to biotech, but it definitely for a university startup, lead compounds were tested in 2 phase 1 clinical trials. But ultimately, Alzheimer's disease is a minefield, and this hasn't gone forward. Currently working on a necroptosis NUCO with IP co-owned by by 2 other institutions, and with universities again investing in internal technology development fund. The key thing here is sort of playing a proactive role in making connections between the scientist and the VCs, and we've also engaged a entrepreneur scientist to help shape the pitch in order to be able to raise the money, and we're in promising conversations for a seed financing of around 5 to 6 million. I'm also working on a dedicated investment fund with investors to fund a specific multidisciplinary research center. It's a 5-year program. It will have 15 million. It will generate support for programs in regenerative medicine and therapeutics. As always, requires careful management. We'll have a joint steering committee. We'll advance commercialization of projects through close mentorship and collaboration while supporting the scientists to do what they do best. And the actual sort of transaction will take the form of a master sponsor research agreement with an option and licensing provisions. So some key factors for a successful licensed startup. What are they? Understand the biz opportunity and the applications. Build a strong patent portfolio. Or if we're talking about non-traditional IP, sort of understand what that is and how to protect it and how to transfer it. If possible, provide proof of principle and or seed funding. That helps the commercialization, but new data also goes back to the previous point and helps build a stronger patent portfolio. On the process side, streamline agreements and the negotiation process. As negotiators, understand what's important and what isn't important in a negotiation. And remember, we're ultimately trying to close deals rather than the opposite. Operate on a real world timeline. And you can't have a deal that takes 6-12 months. It has to be faster. The other side can't raise money if that happens. Streamline the approval and signing process. This can't be, by a committee that meets, once per quarter. When it's done, you have to sign the next day. Operate the technology transfer office like a business, and with that I mean like with a business mindset. And everything else on success depends on the technology, the markets, and the people who ultimately execute. So that's my presentation. So thank you. And I'll pass it back now to Danos. And I think I might even have been on time or close to it.
Thank you so much, John. After the description of details of deals from Carles, now we heard also about other deals, and we also heard the way you have structured internally, no doubt why the success of Tufts. It's impressive. I mean, I would like immediately to point to some things that I heard from you, like the thinking out of the box or the non-traditional IP. Those are important messages, or the dedicated investment fund. These are all things that we can learn. And thank you for sharing all that with us. It's really impressive the way you described how you operate in details. Before taking the break, we need to take a real 5 minutes break. Is that correct, Robert?
It is, but since we already eat that break with the interesting interventions, perhaps we could do until the end and make the break before the questions and answers.
It depends. If Robert, are you? Is it okay for you to continue? We'll catch up with time. No, Robert Buchanan is the question now.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that.
That's you can continue. And don't worry, Robert Casals, another Robert. we will catch up with time at the middle session where we have the presentation of our team, and we will try to make it there.
No, as far as we invest instead of waste,
okay.
which
so
is the
I agree.
case.
Let's continue. I'd like to welcome Robert Buchanan, who's going to present his experiences. And as I said, Robert has worked in Europe for many years and in the US, and he's an investor, he's an entrepreneur, he has held senior legal and management position, a wealth of experience. Thank you, Robert, for being with us.
Thank you, Danos. Yeah, my name is Robert Buchanan. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Ambulero based in Miami, Florida. Ambulero is a cell and gene therapy spinout of the University of Miami that's focused on developing new treatments for rare and not so rare vascular disorders where unfortunately the standard of care is amputation. I'm also an entrepreneur in residence there, and I want to say on behalf of myself and everyone at Ambulero, it's a privilege to be invited to speak before the European Innovation Council and ISMEA. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to give a snapshot of the licensing picture in the US right now. And I should say all my comments are pretty much based on the US experience. And this table is coming from the Association of University Technology Managers from 2020. And it was very surprising to me coming from a therapeutics and medical device background. If you look since 1996 out into 2020, the orange here is the number of exclusive licenses where the university has an exclusive relationship with the company that's taking the license. And that's pretty much flatlined over the period. But beginning in about 2000, the number of non-exclusive licenses and options increased significantly. And this is reflecting what John Cosmopoulos said from Tufts in the prior talk, where what's happening here is that universities are becoming very creative in out-licensing on a non-exclusive basis, non-traditional IP. Most of this is being driven by data, real-world data licenses and software, and many startups are now requiring access to the data. So at the University of Miami Medical School, for instance, they're having people come to them to want access to their database on a non-exclusive basis, and the university is doing those kind of licenses. I mention this here because whatever business you're in, data, access to data, lots of data is probably going to be helpful. And I would encourage all the participants to think about what kind of data and software would drive their business forward. But it's important to remember that you only pay in a license what you need. So typically these are non-exclusive relationships between the university and the startup or small company. Exclusive relationships, you would need that for therapeutics and medical devices and innovations of that sort. Also from the Association of University Technology Managers in 2020, there's more licensing activity going on with small companies and startups versus large companies. And that was counterintuitive to me. I thought, large companies, Pfizer's, Genentech, those kind of deals would be the mainstay, but that's not true. It's really small companies with less than 20 people employed in the company. And the number of large company deals are decreasing. What this means is that deal flow and startup activity is coming back in the US despite the pandemic and the sort of chaos that's going on in the US right now. And I think John would agree that we have right now a very healthy environment with startups and small companies despite the challenges that we have here in the US. So to take an option or not an option. So I'm a lawyer by training. That's one of my backgrounds. And so I like to define a term before I use it. What's an option? It's an exclusive relationship between a university, a startup, a small company, or a large company, where that exclusivity you pay to have it with some cash. And so in my presentation today, I'm going to give specific examples, specific numbers and facts that might be useful and might empower you in your conversations with universities or licensees that you can use. So the option terms that we see here in the US, in my experience, to pay for that exclusivity is less than $5,000. They're typically exclusive, and you get that exclusive relationship for 6 to 12 months. Universities here, in my experience, typically ask you to pick up patent expenses during the option period. And one university was very important to them that any new IP that you develop during the option period belongs to the universities. What universities are very careful about is that when someone comes to them during the option period, sort of sees behind the curtain what they're developing, then goes and develops their own IP, then the university is cut out from that. So the universities I deal with ask for that. And if you're developing a therapeutic or a medical device, you want to do an option, you want it exclusive. And while you're negotiating the option with the university, try to include some key licensing provisions like milestones or upfronts. It's a real time saver with the licensing negotiation, which can be 6 months or longer. The best license is always one that works for both sides. I know that's a cliche, but I can tell you after doing this for 20 years, you as a small company or startup, you want to make sure that you leave the table with the university so that both sides feel that they have a win. It's not a zero-sum game, and if you are a very hard negotiator and you extract key terms from your partner and they don't feel good about it, just remember you may have to go back and amend that agreement, and that will be a very, very tough discussion. So I always try to leave the table with both sides acknowledging a win. I'm going to talk about some, in my experience, some university must-haves, how the company can align with those must-haves, some deal terms, upfront milestones, percent stock in terms of the university and the co-founders that we've seen from Ambulero and other companies. And importantly, who owns IP improvements? I stuck that in at the last moment because I'm dealing with a university research center right now, which is very mindful of improvements to their technology. On the one hand, they don't want an improvement that's going to circumvent the technology that they're licensing to you, and it will be cut out. But on the other hand, the small company, if the improvement is made in their laboratory, they should own it. So that's a discussion that's happening right now in my practice, but something that as a young company you should try to own all your improvements. So here's a table. On the left side is my experience with the university must have out of a license and where the company can align that. So the universities here in the US, they are required to have technology developed for the public good. Oftentimes it's baked into their organizational documents that they have to do this. And so you can work with that. You know, if they're working with you, they do want you to succeed and get the innovation out to the public. For the company, of course, your technology, you're developing it for shareholders because if you're a small startup or a small company, you're for profit, but that can be an alignment of goals here. The university wants it to get out to the public. You want that to happen too for the benefit of your shareholders. Patent expenses. In over 20 years of doing this, I've never had a university tell me that they will pick up patent expenses. And the reason for that is they have a budget, they have to report to senior management in their institutions, and they have to get those patent expenses off the book. So in my discussions with universities, I never bring up this point. I just assume that this is an expense that will have to be baked into the license. Universities typically do not want any stock dilution until you're funded. And typically they'll want to see between $1 and $5 million before they will get diluted by other investors coming in. And what you want to do as a company is to minimize the initial funding threshold. So for example, if a university doesn't want to be diluted till $10 million, you can sort of back that down to $1 to $5 million. Because you do want the university diluted because all investors are diluted eventually as new investors come in. Universities, in my experience, are very sensitive to flipping the technology. So if you're a startup, you get a license and then you do a deal with another company right after you sign the license with the university. That's called flipping the technology, and they don't like to see that. You can assure the university, you can have alignment in saying that, you know, you're going to develop the technology, and there'll be penalties for flipping in terms of sub-license fees. Universities, if the co-founders are professors or investigators there, they want to make sure that those employees are rewarded, if only because, you know, if they're unhappy, it sort of percolates up to university management. And so in my dealings with universities, they always want to make sure that their co-founders are well taken care of. We don't have employees in the startups that we form. Typically, there's a consulting agreement with strong stock and sometimes deferred salaries. And milestones. Universities want to make sure that the innovation doesn't sit on the shelf, that you're actually developing it, and so they'll ask for milestones. That's a perfectly reasonable thing. As a company, you want to be sure that there are as few milestones as possible, and that you have in the license agreement a best effort provision. So that in other words, if you used your best efforts at reaching a milestone, the milestone didn't happen because of some scientific problem, you want to be sure that the university doesn't pull back the license and give it to someone else. So make sure that you have best effort language in your license and keep the milestones as few as possible. A few final key licensing concepts. As a startup or a small company, you want a low upfront to the university because cash is precious. And the last thing investors like to see is money that they put into the company going out the door, even for a university license. You want a back end or put to the end of the relationship as much as possible, as much of the economics that are going from you to the university. And universities understand this. Again, they want you to be successful. Your success is their success. So this is just a negotiation, but it's not a really hard one. Keep the milestones light. Make sure there's a best effort standard in there. And university stock, in my experience, and this was good until yesterday. We have a lot of very good university partners that will keep their stock, founder stock, below 10%. And of course, yesterday, after I sent these slides out, we have a university that said I never go below 10%. So there it is. And you like to see the university diluted after a 1 to 5 million raise. Universities are great partners, but they should expect to be diluted. They should not have a voice on the board, maybe an observer seat, but they're a partner that should, as the company becomes larger and more successful, should fade away. Make sure that there are royalty discounts in your license. So a valid claim, you only want to give royalties where the university has filed a patent application. You want to try and see if there's generic competition in the marketplace that the university you'll have a discount on the royalties going to the university. And if you require a lot of licenses to make your product that you're getting from the university, have an anti-stack provision in there, which basically says, if I have to go out and get additional licenses, I'm going to get a discount from the university in terms of the royalties. That's usually a very challenging discussion with universities, but again, they want you to be successful. They want the innovation out there into the public. You can expect a 10 to 50% discount for each of these. The university will ask for a floor. So if you have all of these royalty discounts, they'll say, fine, but we say we don't want to be discounted any more than 50%. And it's very important to get access to university improvements in your technology. Professors are very creative individuals. And so if they're making improvements or new innovations in your field of use, you want to be sure in your license you have a right of first refusal or negotiation to come back to them and say, look, what you have now is better than what I licensed. Could I license that as well? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert. Very clear, and thank you for being your time. What I'm keeping, from your presentation is the exclusive relationship. We're learning from you, and I hope our beneficiaries are going to they appreciate that. The licensing concepts that you described, the details in negotiation, the alignment of comments with the university. This is of particular interest to us, and especially we have lots of Pathfinder projects that they are thinking about the future commercialization. So I'm sure you understand how important it is for them to be introduced to what you describes. Thanks again so much for that. Yes, I'd like now to welcome Trine Bartleby from the Bioinnovation Institute, heading the innovation unit or department, I would say. Trine, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
It's very nice.
I am just.
Please, the floor is yours.
You see the screen?
We do.
No, let's see if I can. Right. So it's getting more and more difficult to add new insights into this after all these great presentations we already heard. But
Trine, I'm sorry, we have some slight echo problem. Is it? I don't know why.
I do. Okay, I will try without the headset. Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Perhaps it's the microphone. Do you have the headset with a microphone?
Yeah, but it's closed now. Now I only have the computer.
This is what I mean. Try to put a headset with a microphone, please.
Next. Can you hear me now?
I think now it's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yeah,
and slightly better. Thank you very much.
All right, let's hope it works. I work for Bioinnovation Institute here in Copenhagen, and we are a life science incubator and accelerator, basically bridging between academia and business. So to your Dennis's earlier point, I'm one of the people who works from a portfolio perspective as well, as we spin out quite a few companies from academia every year. So first, I'll give you a brief intro of who we are, and then I'll come up with some concrete examples across the life science areas that we work with. So we work with both therapeutics, we work with health tech, which includes medical technology and digital health, and we also work with bioindustrials. And then at the end, I will summarize with a few key takeaways. So a bit of background here. Bioinnovation Institute was created in 2018 by Novo Nordisk Foundation. For the ones who don't know, Novo Nordisk Foundation, it's the largest beneficiary foundation in the world by now. It even succeeded Bill and Melinda Gates last year, I believe. And Bioinnovation Institute were put in place to strengthen the ecosystem between academia and the startup environment, as we could see that there was a big gap in terms of actually making companies and scientific projects translating into venture-backed companies. By now, we have created more than 60 new life science startups. Along this year, we have created 25 new life science startups. And I believe we are becoming the biggest player in the Scandinavian scene, and hopefully soon also in Europe. So until now, we have granted more than 55 million euro. And one of the KPIs we have as a non-for-profit company is that we want to see our startups obtaining a Series A or C financing after we have incubated them. Interestingly enough as well, 75% of our founders come straight from academia. And this leads me to the next one in terms of how we work. Because one thing is, of course, that we can fund the companies through our 1 to 3 year programs, but we also provide knowledge and education during the time the founders are with us. So a lot of them will never have been an entrepreneur before. So we have a lot of educational crunches and peer grouping and people working together. Furthermore, we also provide network. We have an established venture capital network with more than 35 renowned venture capitalists around the world. And as I said, we do have 3 different funding programs. And then we also provide the infrastructure, because this is really important. We see a lot of lack of lab access and office spaces in the Copenhagen area, and we provide that in our premises here. Now, a couple of examples. As I said, we have done quite a few spin-outs now. So primarily from Denmark, but we have also done from the US, UK, Germany, just last year and this year. So these are just examples, sort of the average thing we have seen. So if we take therapeutics first, we see a signing upfront fee from between 0 and 50,000 euro. Robert just mentioned that he would never negotiate that. I would challenge that a little bit, because for some of these really early stage companies, 50,000 K actually means something. It means half a head count or something like that. So we actually have been able to, from time to time, to postpone that signing fee until a later milestone, because cash is really king at the early stages. Then, of course, we have all the typical milestones from the clinical trials. It could also be first patient in. These are, again, just examples. And then typically, we also see a running royalty on all net sales. So as soon as you have any net sales, there will be a running royalty despite the threshold value. And on top, we also see this ladder system in place with typically small or lower double-digit royalties for the lower sales levels, and then going down to 6, 3, even 2% at times. And then we also see this purchase option, not always, but quite a few of the research organizations provide the opportunity to buy out the whole licensing agreement upfront at certain milestone phases. In general, for the therapeutics, we see a lot of variety, not only within Denmark, which we certainly do, but also within Europe, because they seem to be quite different. And actually, now my sound is getting really weird. I think I'll try to take it out again. Can you hear me?
We still can hear you well, eh? And perhaps it's try without the headset.
About this, yes. So for health tech, we see the same size of upfront fees, and we see the same, not quite the same milestones, because here it's more in terms of once you are able to test your system in patients, then a milestone can kick in. And then, of course, for the regulatory, they typically go for another route, CE or FDA 510K approval, which will also trigger milestones. Again, we see running royalty on net sales, any net sales coming in. It can also be if you manage to have a licensing agreement with a third party and you get revenue in, that can also trigger an extra royalty. And again, we see the stepwise royalty pending on the intervals of your sales. And again, we see a purchase option in a few cases, not as expensive as the therapeutic area. For bioindustrials, which is a growing area within our institute, same thing on the signing fee, seems to be quite equal across the areas. And for bioindustrials, of course, the key milestones and the key value inflection points is around the manufacturing capabilities. So typically for a bioindustrial company, you will see milestones payment triggered by your manufacturing step-ups and scale-up opportunities. Again, running royalty on net sales and this interval on the royalty on revenue. And a smaller purchase option can also be in place. Now, key takeaways. As I said, upfront payments are common. And as Robert also said, it's usual to cover passing costs, which can make sense. But you may consider if capital is really difficult for you to access, you may consider if you can postpone that payment a bit. We also see an alignment in terms of the running royalties, and we mentioned all the milestones here across the three areas. Then we see a big difference, but also some logic in terms of the research organizations requiring high milestone payments, but lower sub-licensing fees, and then the other way around. So if you combine all the payments, at least it's my experience that you actually see some logic in it. So some has high upfront and lower backloaded. So there seems to be some balance in it that you, as a licensee, can work with. Also, the purchase option seems to be most applicable in the therapeutic areas. And this, of course, is not something you may, that you will be able or even want to trigger at the early stage. But it could be a good one to have for later stage purposes. Also, once you get the venture capitalist in, or you want to go for an exit with a industrial partner. Then equity is rarely used in Denmark, and also for most of the European institutions we have worked with. We have seen 15 to 30%. 30% is from a US organization we were recently in discussions with, but it's not that often used. And back to Robert's comment earlier, I think if you can avoid it, better do, or at least make certain that they are as passive an investor as possible, and that they are as much aligned to the founders as possible. Then also our experience is that we have seen a limited use of anti-stacking clauses. We may come back to this later, but this is something to consider for you as a licensee as well. So some advice, it's all about people. At least that's our experience here in working with all our startups. So each person will have their own capabilities and own entrepreneurial mindset. One advice is that you really know your tech transfer officer well in advance and get to sort of establish a relationship. Also be aware that the role is to make money for the university and at the same time commercialize the research. And I just have to say somehow that's a conflict in itself. We heard it earlier from Tuft, and I'm not envious of people who have to balance this, because it must be difficult at times. But be very much aware of the TTO role here and how to best have a fruitful dialogue about it. Know the timelines. We have had incidences where it took up to 1 year for the TTO office to actually get to a closure of the deal. And that can be because some organizations may have very low resources, and it will prolong the whole discussion. So be aware of that. This has been mentioned a couple of times already. Really know your market build up, expected life cycle. I would highly recommend to run a risk-adjusted net present value calculation for what you expect, because that just working with all the key assumptions can be of a great help when you enter into negotiations, not only with the TTOs, but actually also with the venture capitalist or an industrial business development partner later on. And then again, think about if you prefer backloaded or front-loaded. Most would prefer backloaded, and certainly any venture capitalist would most likely prefer that as well. Look for reference licensing terms, and this is something that we have found is difficult, and why we have started to compile all the licensing agreements we have had. So we are actually able to compare now within our portfolio, and we can use that knowledge. Of course, we can't disclose the specific research organizations, but we sort of know what good standard looks like by now, and we help our startups when negotiating with the universities on this front as well. Then also be aware of any third-party IP dependency, because once you have done your initial licensing, think about how and what it will take to take your product all the way to market, because you will most likely be dependent on other IPs coming along and access to other technologies. And that ties me to the last one, which is the anti-stack provisions. And this discussion will most likely be driven by the licensee rather than the university in this case, because it's you who know how many patents you will need and what an anti-stack provision would look like from a reasonable level. So I will actually end with this and just say thank you for listening.
Thanks, Trina. Thanks so much. I very much like your comments about the NNF, how big it is globally. It's very important for people to know that in Europe, in Denmark, there is really not just the size, but it's very successful, and as you said, the biggest probably in the world. That's something that not all people know. Also, I'd like our grantees and other colleagues and people that are listening here to know that we have a lot of interaction with you, and this is really important. I have visited you, and I saw what great work you're doing in this Bioinnovation Institute. It's something that, for those that are not known, they can investigate further. And of course, we have also accepted people from you there. So this interaction is valuable to us, and thank you for sharing. Comments also like that. Equity is something rarely seen in Denmark. They can also stimulate further discussion. You have the time also with Robert to exchange in the panel with John Hostel sharing. Let us now take questions, and until at least 15:45, I would say. Would like the help of Max for that, and then we definitely need the break.
Danos, since we didn't take the break before, what do you think about taking it now? So we let the people get into Slido, see the questions that are already there. And in 3-4 minutes, we meet back and start the questions and answers.
We can do that too. We can do that too, Robert.
Because we did it all in a row, and perhaps we need to take.
We can do it either after, or it doesn't make any difference. If you need those minutes for really to be able to prioritize the questions, yes, let's do that way.
Okay,
let's have
at
a real.
15:37. Let's meet at 15:40. 3 minutes. It's not a lot, but
it's only okay. Just a glass of water.
Okay.
See
you now. So for the rest that are still
rare incidences, it can take even longer, but it is a lengthy process, and don't underestimate what it takes also just to prepare for the discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Trina.
I might add, another question was to Trine, but as a tech transfer person, if I just may add quickly, just to point out with the response that it's a two-way process, and so the length of it doesn't depend on just the university or its resources. It depends also on the other side, and so each side has to determine what's important and what's not. So I get license agreements that are 95% of the sections are redlined, whereas someone corrects even the British versus American spellings. and so that's actually true stories, and that's a sort of a red flag. And so also the licensee has to figure out what's important, and same with licensor. It's a two-way street.
Okay, John, thank you so much. Before we move on to the next, please, I mean, I don't have to say to experience the speakers and panelists like you that please provide brief answers so we can also accommodate, you know, interventions by others as John did. And thanks so much right now. So we go to the next one. Robert or Max, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Holger Kissel. Of course, someone else may intervene. Your slide showed licensing deals with mainly large companies. Do you have relationships or do deals with academic bodies?
So the simple answer is yes. We're very interested in licensing technologies from universities, also you know, looking at publications, reaching out to universities, and if in order basically to stay on the cutting edge of research, right? So we have multiple university relationships. We are in fact here in Mainz still connected closely to the university as well as a nonprofit institute across the street from BioNTech, which we have a long-term relationship with, which I can speak to later also on the panel. So the short answer is yes. A very good example is our relationship with the University of Pennsylvania, which we concluded in 2018 with an almost exclusive relationship with the laboratory of Drew Weissman, mRNA expertise and infectious disease, which provided us via the University of Pennsylvania access to a large network of collaborators of the university, which we also have relationships with. So the short answer is yes, we do have these agreements.
Thank you very much. Let's go for the next question. What is the best way to approach a license to start with the negotiations for licensing out an innovation? Who to approach within the structure and how to approach? First come, first serve. Who answers?
I assume they mean sort of a license from a university or research institute. If so, there's usually a clear line of responsibility. You know, there's someone whose name is on the website as responsible for, I don't know, the School of Medicine or a particular grouping within the School of Medicine. And so that's the first person to approach. And if you can't figure it out, start from the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next one, please.
Oh, sorry, John. It's interesting. I read the question in another way. I thought the writer was inquiring about what happens if another company they want to do a license with another company. So another company, no company wants to know that they need to take a license that they didn't intend on taking. So the way I've approached that is to start with a partnership, a research partnership, a sponsored research agreement, to have a partnership first and then worry about the license later.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Thank you very much. Perhaps one last question, Carlos, from Julia. Did you see different issues in the different disease areas arising?
Yes, and I would say that I saw most of the issues around the technology that they're trying to use to address those disease areas. So for instance, for many years, I've seen that in the drug delivery space, it's been very difficult to get any sort of approvals or for novel nanoparticles, for instance. And just now in the last couple of years, we have seen lipid nanoparticles being used also for the vaccines that we all have, or most of us have. And I think that has been, kind of breaking a barrier in that field. But I see also, similar things within the cell and gene therapy space, for instance. It's just a matter of having enough data that is supporting and compelling so that you can convince the regulatory agencies, I guess.
Thank you, Carlos. I think we are on time, so we could probably take on one or two more questions, Robert.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So next one, Trine again. Could you please describe payment examples of software database licensing?
That is a very broad question because it depends very much on the use case here and what kind of database and level of validation of data you have. But in the sense, if it's a digital health tool, for instance, for therapy optimizing or something like that, then you will pay pending on the use case and the business model you expect to apply. It can also just be I mean, that's where, again, you will need to figure out how much do you think you can actually make out of this product. But it can also be simply a flat fee for getting access to the software and database. So it can be either or, just getting access like any other software license, or it can be with an offside to the provider, depending completely on what kind of technology we're talking about.
And the last one.
Thank you very much. I think the last one, well, what are the advised licensing conditions if the invention is just a component of a complex system? Who wants to answer this one?
It's not very specific though. It's
Nope.
Well, then we come into that's Robert's, talked about anti-stacking. So that's one way to approach it. And so we have the licensing terms, and then the licensee can apply anti-stacking. That's one idea. Would you not agree, Robert?
Yes. Yeah.
okay. John, is that for you? Could you please say more about the entrepreneurial races and venture mentors? I guess it's you. Very briefly, please, and that's the last time.
So this is simply on the model of using advisors of various kinds. The entrepreneur in residence is someone who's been a serial entrepreneur, who has experience with different kinds of companies. In fact, Robert could speak even better. So being a de facto EIR, and so when we have faculty members who would like to do a startup, we put them in touch with the EIR to provide, or the venture mentor. There's similarities in those types of roles to give them perspective, and answering key questions. Like, sometimes they can't decide how to allocate the equity among the co-founders, and so they need some working models around that, or to try to figure out the business model and how to make money.
Robert, you want to add something, or we move on to the next session? Robert Buchanan?
No, nothing to add to that one.
Okay, very good. And perhaps Chris will come later on. We will introduce to you. Could perhaps has one word to say. Okay. So Robert Casals now.
Yeah. We will hold these questions for later. Don't worry.
Very good. Very good. Now it's time, and we'll try to catch up. It's time to introduce to you the people that I am fortunate and privileged to work with here in AIC, and forming, the team that we have in health and biotech. And I'd like please to open their cameras, Ioannis Amarantos and Gonzalo Neto. For it's a very good opportunity. Ioannis comes from the Pathfinder, and Gonzalo is from the transition unit. And also we have, unfortunately not with us today, Anna Bulzaka from the Accelerator, Barbara Geratana, and Vilma Radvilaita from the Accelerator. Barbara is from the Pathfinder. So we are working together, and we have altogether built a portfolio across the 3 financial instruments. So Ioannis and Gonzalo, as much as he can because of his sore throat, will present the health and biotech portfolio, and it would be nice to share with all the people here, all the attendees of this conference, and especially our beneficiaries, what is the logic behind that, and what do we mean by consistent thematic portfolio, and what do we mean by dynamic categories that are being formed as we move along. I'd like now to welcome Ioannis and Gonzalo for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jordanis. So unfortunately, as Gonzalo was quite sick, we agreed that I will present all of the slides, but he's here today, and we're very happy that he could join. So I will I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen? And thank you for the introduction.
Can you see
my screen? Yes.
We can.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So as Jordanis explained, I will introduce you to the concept of that we applied in the health and biotechnology portfolio in order to categorize our projects. And this slide, please don't get afraid. I'm not going to go in details. I know that my time is quite strictly regulated from Jordanis. It's just to show you our working canvas and how we started actually to categorize the projects in the health and biotechnology portfolio. On the first place, we considered and we monitored quite closely the biotrends in the market. And we kept these biotrends in mind, although it was not our exclusive criteria to categorize the projects, because we could expect that we could find additional trends in our portfolio. Using this list of biotrends, we try to categorize first the project in the first financial instrument, the Pathfinder, which address the early stage research. And we came up with this canvas, as you see here. We found a lot of different similarities with what is happening now in the market, but it became also obvious from the very beginning that we could not analyze only the Pathfinder projects. As you probably know, we have additional financial instruments, the transition, the accelerator, which address later stages of development. So we applied, with the help of my colleague Gonzalo Neto, we applied the same concept in the transition portfolio, and we tried to normalize each of the other financial instruments to Pathfinder and see what are the similarities, what are the differences. You can see here very nicely, for example, with these blue dots, these are projects that continued in the second financial instrument, their development. It was new projects that were funded, but their precursors, the first projects, came from Pathfinder. You see these blue spots corresponds one-to-one to the projects in the same categories that were funded now from transition. And continuing this approach, we did the same with the help of my colleague that Danos mentioned, Anna Bulzaka, and the accelerator, and we came with this working canvas, as you see here. The final categorization we could project it here in this slide, where you see very clearly the categories and also how they are distributed within the financial instruments. But I will explain why this categorization is dynamic and not static, for two reasons. One reason is that if you look at some of these categories, you will notice that represent the trends in the market. For example, we see that we have a lot of projects in the cancer treatment and companion diagnostic area, while we have less projects in the cell and gene therapy area, or even more or less in the extracellular vesicles area, which this is a kind of reflection of what's happening actually nowadays, if we look at the trends. The second, so we have a way to project what's happening outside. The second way why this is a dynamic approach is because these categories are developing, and we develop them during several iterations. For instance, in the small portfolio here, like extracellular vesicles, if we start to see a trend, for instance, extracellular vesicles that are addressing cardiovascular diseases for therapeutics reasons, we find several projects in this area, then we build a subcategory, and we can monitor this subcategory with time. If we see this trend rising, it means it's an actual category, while if we see that it's static, we can reconsider the categorization. And finally, this is the most present categories and the way they're distributed with the financial instruments. Thank you very much, and if there are questions, I will be happy to take them.
No, Ioannis, thanks. Clear what we mean by consistent, and it's a great opportunity because we have here in the audience our beneficiaries from Pathfinder, from Transition, from Accelerator. It's a very good opportunity for me also to thank the heads of the three financial instruments, Timo Halandi, Virel Pekka, and Cornelius Smalls, because we are, without them and without their understanding of what we do, that wouldn't have been possible. It's a work that cuts across EIC, all three financial instruments. What Ioannis just described, the consistent thematic portfolio, is something new, something dynamic, and we will continue along this avenue. Now, I'd like to, we are a team, but Florent, that I can see right now, I've opened his camera, I would consider him as our extended team, if I may, because also he's our scientific counselor. He sits in Washington. He will tell you all about it, but we have the privilege to have his help, also because of his background. Well, his background in biotech is something unexpected for us, and something that we are, allow me to say, taking advantage a little bit to the benefit of our institution. So Florian, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Danos. It's really a great pleasure and honor to join your seminar. It's extremely interesting. So indeed, I'm the science counselor here in Washington, D.C. I will be here until September 2025, and I'll be really glad to help to contribute to the success of the EIC program. Of course, that's why I'm here. I'm here to support you. I want to flag, of course, if it's still needed, the importance of your companies to be exposed to the US ecosystem, to the US market, not only for licensing, which is extremely important, and the exit strategies, but also for the mindset and the dynamism of the market. That's where you see how the competition is and how you can adapt your own products to the huge US market. So this is extremely important, and for that I have a number of tools that could help you. You of course already know the tool provided by the EIC, which is the Overseas Trade Fair, but we go beyond that, and we have a number of networks here in the US. Notably, we have the European Institute of Technology Hub that is located in San Francisco and is supporting all the KIC, notably the KIC Health also, and we could have access to their know-how and their advice in case it's necessary. We also have a program that brings startups to the US to expose them to the local ecosystem, which is called Enrich, and we can liaise you guys with this program. And also my role is to reach out to the local ecosystem, so finding new opportunities with local actors like ARPA-H, but also looking into newly developed innovation hub in the US. You all know Boston, of course, but since I got here last September, I realized how dynamic other hubs are becoming. I was in Houston in March, and it was extremely developed hub for health, for biotech, for medical device, and I plan to continue scouting for more hubs that could be of interest for European companies to reach out to. So I will be in touch with Danos, and I'm happy to support you in your endeavors, and wishing you a great success, of course. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Florian. It's very good to know the people that you not only are there for us, for the European Innovation Council, but you have expertise and skills in health and biotech, and that is to our advantage. Right now, I'd like to thanks again. Before we move to our expert, Chris Buchanan, I'd like to, Max, please, Max Siebert, who is have the privilege to, he's working closely with me to open his camera, because he's somebody that you should know, all the health and biotech. Max has done an amazing work over the last months, and he has been a major contributor to all the work that we're doing here. Max, could you please open the camera, turn on the camera, please? It would be good for all our Max Siebert. I guess he will do it.
Can you hear me? Thanks for your kind words, Danos.
No, it's very important to know if you can say one word about yourself, and please, very briefly, Max.
Thanks. Actually, I am a Blue Book trainee at the moment. Happy to work with Danos in the European Innovation Council. And it was an accident coming here, but a lucky one. And because I did my PhD more in clinical epidemiology. But thanks for Danos, and thanks for everyone for coming. And I hope you're enjoying the event. And let's have a chat later.
It's important that we keep him here before he goes for his postdoc in California. And we, of course, it's wonderful to have him, because he has is a young man with lots of a lot of expertise, really, that are particularly useful for an institution like EIC. Now it's time for our expert in California, but also in Europe, because he's very mobile, I guess. Chris Buchanan, are you share a few words with us. Chris has been advising, and in particular, I have, I get directly her advice. She has a lot of experience with the venture capital, and she has also a very good network in California. She has founded companies, and so Chris, over to you. Share with us a little bit your experience and your important role in helping us what we do.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Chris. Hello from New York today. I'm a
Today.
today.
Today. So
Today New
dynamic.
York.
Today New York.
Tomorrow Frankfurt. I'm a managing partner, co-founder of Veracity Capital, and we only invest in research spinouts. And we love the stage when there is just a research paper and we have to figure out what to do with it. So like many of these presentations, we actually are hands-on across many different ways how to get science into the market. I guess we'll talk about it later.
But please, it would be nice if you explain a little bit for the people that we have, the grantees, that because of your network and the information you can get before it becomes mainstream in research. That's very important, as we have too many projects, good projects at the Pathfinder level. So it will be interesting for them to listen how you can help us in getting the new trends, the new scientific breakthroughs before they become known, before they get published, and have this information critical for us, for all what Johannes described before in building portfolios and knowing where to focus. Sure. One more word from you.
Okay. 5 minutes, 2, 1?
2 minutes, please.
Okay, 2 minutes. Well, I mean, the way we work, I'm also entrepreneur in residence at Columbia University. So we see about 400 plus technology disclosures a year. We have about 25 spinouts a year. So we're very hands-on and figure out, okay, you have a new protein. What do we do with it? Do we start a company or do we straight out license it? With our university, with our venture capital, Veracity, we do ourselves. We put the legwork in. If you come to us, let's say I have a new molecule, we validate the market first before we invest. Okay. So the way we work is that we talk to corporates, Pfizer, Novo, whoever is out there, on a very regular basis. And we keep track of what they need because the business needs change, right? The strategy changes, CEO changes, whatever. And then we take that information and we track whatever is happening in the research, right? So we look at all the 186 projects that EIC funded, and if we see something very interesting that the corporate said, oh, this is actually a field of interest, we share the deck with them. We see what is the feedback, and if we get feedback from 2 or 3 potential future clients that can license it or they want it, then we invest. Okay, so we basically do market development for you, including with the pilot, and we invest. But we are very selective, right? We have deep tech, as I said, in cybersecurity, 40% in cybersecurity, 60% deep tech. In that we don't really do therapeutics per se, but we do biotechnology, right? We do medical devices. And our next one is going to be focused on also on dual use, right? So there are things when you see you have one thing, but we can find a different market for it. I think for entrepreneurs in residence and licensing, I think the main reason, the main difference I see US, Europe, is the speed, right? In US, we are like this. In Europe, I've seen instances, sad, where companies fell apart because it took 2 years to negotiate IP with the institution, okay? Then I saw another instance, which was also sad, where the professor wanted to start a company around therapeutics, and it was very exciting, right? We really loved that. And we talked to tech transfer, and it turned out that the tech transfer office already licensed the research to a large pharma company without the knowledge of the professor. Right. So that's.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing. It was good that I asked because these are all your comments inspiration for the discussion we'll follow with John Hodgson, and it's important also for our grantees once again to listen. It's good to have you. I would like now to ask Gonzalo Neto to also turn on his camera for a second. He didn't talk, but also for our grantees to know who is the member of our team at the transition unit. Gonzalo, if you want to say one word, 30 seconds, please, or 1 minute, but please.
Hello, Danos. Thank you very much, and apologies for this strange voice I have today. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of the health and biotech team. And myself, I'm a project officer within the transition unit under Virel and Marcus. And yeah, I'm mainly dealing with projects on the health topic, and it has been, as you have seen in our portfolio, are still a growing funding scheme. We only have currently 13 projects under our portfolio, but many interesting projects are now under evaluation actually currently, and I think few of them will join later on our portfolio.
Okay. Thanks very much, Gonzalo. Unfortunately, the ladies in our team are not present here for different reasons. Robert, I think it's time to move to the questions and answers. Is that correct?
Indeed, that's actually we have time. We have several questions that may be answered. I will share my screen once again.
And also, I'd like to, yes, that's very good. That's what I want to say. Please continue asking the speakers in the first session, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we could go back to the first session. Danos, you suggest?
Of course,
Okay, then Holger, please, many of the collaborations right before you published. When do you think it's best moment to establish such connections?
Let me first say, I think it's not entirely true. I think we've published continuously, and the company was founded, of course, on the, let's say, academic days of the founders, where mRNA technology was basically established. However, I think right before you publish, I think the most important message would be, don't start partnering before you have patented your technologies. I think that is one of the key aspects that we learned, and the other aspect is, so, I mean, we have partnered. As you may have seen in the slides that I showed, I mean, between 2008 and 2013, for 5 years, effectively, the company was in stealth mode. We actually only had a website starting 2014, and we started partnering based on clinical data. So we were already in the clinic with our technologies, and that certainly was very helpful. Last aspect I just want to raise, of course, you need to think about what is the value that you think you want to generate with your technology. The earlier you start out licensing, the less money you will get. So certain validation, I think, an investment in let's say early clinical data, for example, showing safety of your compound, certainly almost by a log scale, I would say, increases the value of your technology. And yeah, so it's a bit of a
I think the second one is also, for you. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, have the processes eased over the last 2 years, or more the opposite? Well, I don't think that I don't see how the processes really have eased or either became more difficult. I have to say, I think it's effectively the same. Maybe the number of opportunities that are available has changed more in favor to the buy side. I think more recently, given the current market conditions. But I wouldn't say the processes have either, in my opinion, neither eased nor have they become more complicated. I think I didn't see any drastic changes. They have become more complicated for us because people know we have no more money. So when we negotiate, it's a bit harder to get the terms we were used to.
Thanks, Holger. I think that the next one was for Robert, if I.
Wait.
Yes, Robert, you can.
So what that?
Robert, still with us?
Yes, I'm happy to take that. So what are the deal breakers, no-goes for me when it comes to university? Well, I've never really had one until today. And that when Chris gave us an example where the university out-licensed the professor's research without him or her knowing that's the case. That would certainly be a deal breaker. But look, universities, at least in the US, it's in their charter to get innovations to the public. They want to work with you. Where I've had the most challenges is with an inexperienced TTO staff. And that happens even at some of the biggest universities here in the US, if there's been a staff change, or a lot of them are just overworked because of budget cuts. So you have to educate sometimes the other side to let them know what's market and what isn't. That's the biggest challenge. But I've never had a no-go red flag situation, except the one that Chris mentioned. That would be a no-go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Robert, please go on.
Next one. I think this is a very voted question. In case the innovation inventors are physical persons and not universities, how would you advise to approach a licensee, either a startup or established company? I don't know to whom should be addressed this question to, but the floor is yours.
Whoever wants to answer, you're all welcome.
Yeah, so I'll take it. So in the US, any invention that a professor develops with campus resources belongs to the university. So that situation wouldn't happen. But I understand in Europe, in some cases, innovations belong to the professor and not necessarily the university. Although I think that's becoming not the case anymore.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a license as an individual and approach a company. That's certainly the case. It's going to be harder, I think, than coming with the university, given their resources and ability to innovate. So,
if I can add to Robert, thanks, Robert, for that. I think the exceptions are only Sweden and Italy. Sweden has a different tradition for many years, where there were the professors and the researcher, they could have rights. For all the rest of the countries, it's the university who owns and can license exclusively, non-exclusively. So it's only, I believe, Sweden and Italy have a different status. Next one, Robert.
Okay, here we have a question for Florent. How to further enhance the R&I lines between the US and the EU? What should companies contact? Who should companies contact? Florana, you're with us.
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
So yes, as I said, I mean, there are already a lot of connections. So we have some supports that the startup can take advantages. Is the IT hub and the Enrich program for startups. I think that the best way to operate is to go through Danos, and then according to the needs, we can find which is the best partner to reach out. And if there are specific requests, of course, I'm happy to scout for those opportunities myself and see to meet the specific needs of any of the company in the portfolio. I don't know if that answered the question or if it's too broad.
No, that's okay. That's very okay, Florent. Thank you. Next one.
Yeah, since we have time, I mean, this is a question about health and biotech team. If we don't answer this question now, it doesn't matter, because we prefer the experts that are accompanying us today to answer the question. So I beg your understanding for that. So this next question from the previous session: what is the best way to address the absence of any conflict of interest as academic researcher and CEO of the new academic spin-off? Good one.
Please, very brief answers to allow us to take a few more questions.
I'll take that one. I mean, so we prefer that the professors do not have an executive position in the startup company, but that's not a hard rule. The key conflict of interest comes in play if there's sponsored research, and so then you have a situation where the inventor is a co-founder of a company, and that company is then sponsoring research back in his or her lab. Some universities believe that is a unmanageable conflict. Others take a more flexible route. We take a route where in most cases the conflict can be addressed. It's often addressed maybe through a specific plan. It could go as far as someone else looking over the data, just so there's some oversight. But those are ways that one manages those kinds of conflicts.
Next one. Thanks, John.
This is for John. Could you please say more about the entrepreneur in residence and venture mentors?
I think I answered this one.
Did you?
Before?
Sorry.
Yes.
Cool.
I can say, Robert, one second, just one word. The answer to the next one about the helipad is yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So is, and that is the dynamic here. Ivan has just presented that, and so no.
Okay. So next one.
What is Holger, or is what would the? Yeah, Holger. How did you approach partnering with your customers?
Well, competing with each other. I think the references made to the Sanofis, the Pfizers, Roche, Genentechs. Well, basically, it's structuring the license rights. You know, it's like a big cake that we're having, and everybody only gets a specific piece, which is regulated by the license rights you provide, and the field of use of these licenses. So you can structure this that you don't basically the partners don't overlap in their interests.
Thank you so much.
We have one last question. If we got the answer very fast, we will keep a track on time. So, what would be the prospects of exploring technologies involving extracellular vesicles in the near future?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's a very exciting question, and for inspiration, you could look at a company here in the greater Boston area called Kodiak with a C. It's a new field. Cells communicate with each other by shedding these extracellular vesicles. There's a lot of interest here in forming therapeutics around it. So good question.
Thank you so much, Robert. I didn't have you answered for me. That's great, and that's exactly the reason why we have a portfolio of 6-7 projects. We have at the Pathfinder exciting projects. EVs have to do with drug delivery, as Robert said. So we have we have our eyes and ears on that group because it's quite promising for the future and cuts across. It's not only health; there are also other potential applications. Great. We didn't talk with Robert about that, and that's the beauty of this webinar. I mean, and I'm glad to hear that he confirms the interest in from his perspective. So now.
Good. It's 16:20. We are only 5 minutes. So it's great. Thank you very much because we're keeping the time. So let's take 5 minutes of break because the next session is going to be very interesting and we better be ready. So it's 16:20. Let's meet back at 16:25.
Real 5 minutes. Yeah.
Real 5 minutes. Now you have 5 minutes. See you now.
Said 5.
Much. Thank you very much. This workshop is running very well. So I'm not going to take more time of your Danos, please.
It is with great pleasure I'll introduce John Hodgson to all of you. John is currently the Managing Director of Communication and Life Science Advisor, and he is a contributor and editorial advisor to Nature Biotechnology. John has a lot of experience, and he has chaired many panels and a wealth of knowledge in the area. And before I leave you to the safe hands of John, I'd like to inform you that he has published recently in Nature Biotechnology an article ranking the biotech sectors globally. It's a worldview national ranking of biotech sectors, actually. He can say one more word, of course, about that. And it's interesting to see that Sweden and Switzerland are ranked above the States, if I understood very correctly. So John, over to you. John has different titles, a lot of experience, and for me, I can say that personally, he's also a friend. And I'm really very happy that he is with us today, and he's going to chair the panels from now on. John, over to you. Thank you for joining us. And please tell us also about your new publication in Nature Biotechnology.
Okay, thank you, Danos. Thank you for that very kind introduction, much more than I deserve, I'm sure. But yes, the paper that I prepared with Deanna Schreiber on an analysis of national biotech efforts has just been published in Nature Biotechnology, and it builds on the worldview model that Scientific American developed a few years ago. Nature Biotechnology has taken that over, and I did a lot of the work on gathering the data, and my colleague Diana analyzed this so that we've got a publication which is open access. You can access all the data. You can do your own analysis in a different way if you want. So we wanted something that other people could build on, and that's where it is. I think the link for the paper has just been put in the chat, so you can access there. I believe it's open access for everybody. So the connection with this conference and the panel is only that technology transfer and research is one of the 5 pillars that we looked at during that in that study. And actually, I would say that we didn't have the information we had on technology transfer was not as deep as it could have been, and wasn't available in many countries. So we could do with improving that information. But anyway, have a look at the analysis of worldview. My purpose here is not self-publicity, at least not mainly self-publicity, although, you know, we'll get that out of the way. But we've got 2 panels coming up. The first one, I want to kind of drill down into some of the things that we've been hearing from the speakers already, particularly about the changing biotechnology environment and the opportunities that it presents to researchers and institutes and the technology transfer offices, because as the EIC has been reminding us, this is a dynamic environment. You can have experience from 20 years ago. It may not be relevant today. So first of all, if I can start off with Holger, who I know has answered a lot of questions today, but I wanted to ask him a couple of things just to dig down into his experience. One was, I think you said when we chatted previously that you've been with the company for over 10 years. Has the licensing picture changed for you? Clearly, the nature of the company has changed a lot, but has that changed? And are you licensing more from universities than you were, or less? And the other thing I want to ask you while you're thinking about that answer is, what happened? I mean, I guess you as the business development person are the first port of call, or one of the first ports of call for projects coming into the company. What's the process in BioNTech beyond that? I mean, does everything have to be reviewed by Ugo Sahin and Özlem Terici before it gets approval, or, you know, what's the escalate? Who do you have to convince that a project is worthwhile? Can you tell us something about that?
All right. Okay. So it's a 2-pronged question. Let me first say that, of course, the business development landscape for BioNTech has changed dramatically after the success of COVID-19. Yeah, before, as I stated, you know, we were seeking to fund the company, support our portfolio by out licensing and partnering. I say specifically partnering because in the oncology space we actually did not out license, but we concluded, let's say, co-development, cost profit share deals. Yeah, this is we can speak about this in more detail why we did that. So of course, with COVID now being basically on the sell side, so to speak, for a long time, you know, 2015 to 2020 effectively. Yeah, we did some in-licensing also, but effectively now where we are, and you look at our portfolio, we're on the buy side, and we are rather, I'd like to say we have a fully established process. That's certainly not the case. We are now given the bandwidth that we have with our departments. We have a strategy department now. We have various people working there, looking specifically at our portfolio and where are the gaps, and that with a specific focus. I just give an example, cell and gene therapy, for example. You know, we are investing quite significantly in cell and gene therapies, and trying to be at the forefront of the next wave of technologies also, and combine the technologies we have in-house, like messenger RNA, with the CAR-Ts, TCRs, etc., that we have, combined this with gene editing technologies, and thereby defining a scope of technologies that we're looking at, and a team then kind of, I would say, systematically looking at the biotechs, working in that space and looking for innovation, and doing respective diligence in discussions with them, and then deciding if we can move forward with a deal, right? You're on mute, John, you're on mute.
What does this look like to somebody on the outside who's trying to develop that relationship? You know, how many people are they going to have to contact within the company, or is it all channel through?
Well, I mean, either we approach them. I mean, also based on publications, we have approached companies, or if they approach us, it typically comes, yes, that's right, via business development or via conferences. It's very science-driven, I have to say. I mean, many of these opportunities come via our scientists who identify either a paper or who heard a talk at a conference. And I think there's quite a wealth of connections that we have via that. You mentioned Ugo Sahin, Turgy. There's also, we are benefiting in deal making, so to speak, that both of them are scientists, oncologists, clinicians, and continuously read Nature, Science, Cell, etc., and are very much on top of what's happening in the field. It has also been, we have done one deal with a company called MapX, which we actually was an asset deal that we acquired an antibody from, which was driven by Ugo Sahin, who had read a paper, had a meeting with the CEO and said, look, let's buy that. And it was as simple as that, right? Other deals, and the process can be a bit more complex, as I described, where we have 3 or 4 opportunities and then conduct diligence, looking at various aspects, existing deals that a company may have, license restrictions, field restrictions, etc. So it's a bit more complex, but while it may sound, I don't know if I sound very organized here describing this, but again, I want to underline that we are also very opportunistic. And if there's a paper coming out or a new delivery platform coming out, by the blood-brain barrier delivery technology, I found quite interesting that Carlos described. You know, we're happy to engage, and we have now. I have to say, we get quite a bit of maybe some promotion here for our website. We do have a partnering email, and we, I think every 6 weeks or so, go through all of the requests coming or opportunities going in and distribute them to the scientists to collect their feedback.
Yeah, so it's push and pull. It's not just people approaching BioNTech, it's BioNTech making the approach.
Yeah, we're quite proactive.
Okay. I'm going to switch tracks a bit first, just to introduce the other panelists. So, Robert, you're next in line. If you were mentioning various ways of licensing that can lead to spin-off companies. You showed us a nice graph from Autumn about the not decline, but the flattening of exclusive licensing and the rising of non-exclusive licenses. Is there a good way and a bad way to set out spin-off company? I just want to set the spin-off companies on one side before we get to talking more about licensing. And you know, how do you set up a spin-off company? What's the intention? Is the idea to have a kind of separate entity, an orphan child that acts on its own will, or should there be a continually kind of parental-child relationship? And what are some of the best examples of that you've seen? Can you talk to some of that at all, just so that we distinguish the spin-off situation from other licensing?
Yeah, so John, I like to think that I haven't been involved in a bad startup. So the easy thing would be to say I can't speak to that at all. But of course I can speak to that, as can other my co-panelists, because we've all seen things go wrong. So you know, I'm also a member of Inventors Partners, which is an advisory. We do an audit of different universities that ask us to come in, and we look for technologies that have solid science. So I definitely echo what Holger is saying about the science comes first. We look for professors and innovators that are committed to doing a startup. Not every professor or innovator at a university wants to go down this road, because it's, as we all know, it's very challenging and it's very hard, and some of them may not have the time or the interest to do that. We like to put together a good management team, and we like to build a partnership with the university so that additional innovations in our technology space are things that we can acquire relatively easily. And you know, we're always looking at what are investors looking at in our company. They're looking for solid science, good management, and a big market. And I think if you have those things, you're off to a good start.
And is there a sense that the company continues independently from the founding institution, as it were, or should there be a continuing codependence? Is that a good thing to keep it separate, or is it a good thing to keep it kind of interwoven?
I see it as sort of an organic relationship that grows. So sort of a young child that initially needs a lot of help from the university in terms of guidance, in terms of the infusion of innovation and know-how from the university. But eventually that child is expected to grow up and to move away and go to college. And so for a startup, that would be acquiring license deals and partnerships with other companies. Our goal is to be oftentimes is to be acquired 2 to 3 years from when we started. And so that would be that would be definitely the child going to college. So initially it's a very close and almost a needy relationship with the university, but the expectation on both sides is that the company will grow, be able to walk and run on its own, and that's what we try to do.
Maybe just can I just say something?
Of course, come in. Yeah, please.
Just to add to that, I mean, of course with biotech it was a bit of a different picture because I mean from the get-go, we had the goal or the investors' goal was also together with the founders to establish the next generation European biopharmaceutical business, etc. Not to sell it, yeah. But the way we are founded actually was quite interwoven with the university, and more so also with a non-profit institute that was also set up by our founders, by Ugo Sahin, which is, as I mentioned before, across the street from us. And via that structure between university, non-profit institute, and BioNTech, we were actually able in the early days, 2008 to 2012 mostly, to apply for government funding to develop our platforms via the non-profit institute. So we have received quite a significant amount of money and funding from the German government with excellence funds, etc., to build our platforms, develop algorithms, all sorts of things, cutting edge research. And under the agreements that we had with the university as well as this institute, BioNTech was effectively then having exclusive access to these improvements was the commercial outlet. So I think for many years we have stayed very close to this structure. The structure still exists actually, and was mutually beneficial. We also have agreements where we because of the scope of the research we're doing, we pay this institute on a service basis and get data back. But as I said, the structure allowing us to get funding from governments was quite significant in building BioNTech.
Okay, that's an interesting dynamic. So you're playing both the soft and the hard sides of the funding mechanism in a sense, but starting building up from identifying the science that you need to take the programs forward.
Right.
The other thing that I'm wondering, and this is where I want to bring Trine in if I can, within this kind of evolving environment, Trine, what do you tell the academics or the researchers about the involvement going forward in a relationship? Maybe it's clear at the start that you're either spinning out a company or you're licensing out. What are the general messages around the involvement of the founding researchers? Is that a movable feast? Is that something that can be completely flexible, or should those expectations be set out at the outset so that there are no surprises?
I think it's a very good question because I do agree that science comes first, but very close to that comes people and great people. So we do engage a lot with the professor and associate professors from the get-go. We do try to prepare them what it means to be part of a startup. And what we often see is that moving from a lab where you have been used to working on your own premises and working on your own name, simply trying to get your name on as many publications as possible, automatically make you a good colleague and team member in a startup. On the contrary, actually, sometimes. So we do try to set the expectations very early on and explain them what is needed on a personal and on a team level. We even do team assessments, using some of these team assessment, personality assessment tools to have a proper dialogue with them. Now, the next thing is then to figure out, do they want to be part of the spin out or not? Or should we hire in people? Entrepreneurs in residence, we hire them in as well. We set in chairmen, advisors, whatever is needed around the company. But we do see some of the professors are sort of interested in what can this be to become a bio-entrepreneur, and how can I actually get into that role. Luckily, the universities in Copenhagen often allow the professors to do it part-time, so they can have a test and a feel for if this is something they want to do. And we have seen, at least with 3 spin-outs I did last year, that all professors are moving more and more into the startup world. They're spending more and more time in the startups. And then we ensure to mentor them and give them the support and training they need along the way.
Now, that's easy to say, give them the support and training they need along the way. How is that actually provided? I mean, it seems like that could be quite an intensive process in some cases, and maybe if there's an experienced person, it's much easier. But do you have formal mechanisms? You have formal courses, or how does that work? And how much time do you expect to devote to that?
So we have formal courses. So we have monthly crunches, as we call them, where we have some consultants coming in and teaching the founders about what is the target product profile, what does the regulatory landscape look like. One exercise also to go out and test with the industry if your unique selling points are valid to them, or go out and test it in a clinical setting. So we force them in cohorts to go through all these things that eventually...
You force them, did you say?
Yes, we force them because it's part of our program. They won't get any funding or access to our program if they're not
that's
there.
a good mechanism.
Yes. So that's the formal part. We also run a summer school, which is both for internal and external PhD postdoc level who are sort of interested in bioentrepreneurship. We are running that this August as well.
So that's also covering people who may not be attached to a particular company, or so there's just a general training program also?
Yeah, so we have applicants for all over Europe right now. And then we have internal mentors. So each company will be giving a bio-innovation anchor who is also mentoring and supporting the founding team during the program's tenure. So yes, we put a lot of efforts into this, John.
That's interesting to know. Robert, is that your experience for the US as well? Or is it a more active program? We could probably find out from John Cosmopoulos in the next panel as well. But
I think we could certainly learn from Trina's experience and how they're doing it with offering courses. I guess the approach that I've seen here at the University of Miami is that the scientist entrepreneurs are just put into the company and they learn from executives who've been there and done that already. So in the case of Ambulero, my chief medical officer has not been in a company before, but she's the innovator. She's been working on the problem that Ambulero is addressing for over a decade. And she's learning how to be an executive in a company. That also goes with the chief operations officer. So I guess it's more of a learn by doing here with the companies I've been, but we could definitely take a page from Trina's playbook and having at least some of the basics explained to the professors before they join a company.
that's interesting. And Trina, is there a standard setup that you have to force or incentivize people to? I mean, okay, withholding money is a good mechanism, but but on the positive side, there must be some chocolate as well as the whip.
No, I think, I mean, it's never been a real issue. Of course, if we do get in a serial entrepreneur who has done it before, then of course we'll take the decision, okay, you don't need this crunches. But for most people, they see it as an opportunity. And we can even see, we were just at BioEquity recently, which is a big partner in VC conference in Milan. And we can see that the venture capitalists have sort of, they have started to recognize that the quality they're getting in both the teams and the science coming from our portfolio is actually sort of a blue stamp. So we want our ambition is that people coming from a bioinnovation program also get the blue stamp on the bioentrepreneurship side and not only on the science side. So we are here to strengthen the ecosystem in general, which both comes to more startups, but also stronger bioentrepreneurs.
Yeah. talking about strengthening the ecosystem, Trini, if my impression, I don't know everything about the Bioinnovation Institute, but my impression from your talk is that you're reaching beyond the local environment, across national borders and so forth. I guess I could ask a cheap question about whether you see different national differences. That feeds into my worldview article, but I think more interesting than that, to me, is the idea that as a group that's acting on behalf of many academic establishments or research establishments, you yourselves can specialize in the life sciences, can specialize in biotech. What do you think you gain by that versus a tech transfer office that's working for one university and then has to cover the physics and the chemistry and the biology and the English department as well, probably?
So it's a good question, but I think especially the knowledge we get in terms of what sort of business models are available and needed for other startups. So there is some common sense between, once we start to work with bioindustrials, we know a little bit what it takes, or we know what it takes to create a success. And the same applies for digital health tools or medical technologies or therapeutics. So I think gaining that knowledge, what it takes to create a success, is one thing that you specialize. The other thing is, of course, the whole network we are creating. So we have created a platform where we invite all the venture capitalists and the industry for specific areas to look at our portfolio. And that, of course, is also much easier to have a proper network when you are specialized instead of spreading out. So I think for acceleration purposes, it makes a lot of sense. It's much, we have the tools at hand and can accelerate our companies quicker.
Okay, so building those networks, so the multiple sourcing, as it were, of the technologies is an attractant to people like venture capitalists and other
we know
parties.
We know exactly which venture capitalists are interested in X, Y, and Z, right? And we work very closely with them.
And from the industry side, Holger, is that an attractive thing from your side? I mean,
yes, they are. We see a keen interest from the industry as well. And actually, one important point here is I think we do see a trend in both the VCs as well as the industry coming in earlier and earlier. So they are becoming more and more friends to us, almost partners.
Yeah, I think there's not much to add. I think it's what I also observed, that the big deals are getting done earlier and earlier also. I think compared to like 5 or 6 years ago, as I said before, maybe people were waiting for clinical data. That's not the case anymore. I really see that people are jumping on the trends as they are occurring right now.
From your side, it's become less risky to identify something early. You don't need to see.
I wouldn't say less risky. Certainly not.
In your negotiating, I'm sure you wouldn't say that.
I think for certain technologies, I think the value has certainly gone up while the risk, has stayed the same. Go early on.
Yeah. Robert, I noted one thing that I was curious about in your presentation. You had a point on the slide that said non-exclusive licenses driven by data and software. I didn't quite understand what that meant.
Sure.
Can you just dig into that a little bit?
Sure. That slide was a bit of a surprise to me. So if I'm remembering the slide, it's from the Association of University Tech Managers here in the US from 2020. And I had a conversation with John Cosmopoulos about this particular slide, and I think he was aligned in the view that the burst in licensing activity coming from universities isn't exclusive licenses that would typically be built around a therapeutic or a medical device, and that's what I'm used to. It is the universities are becoming more creative. They're responding to a market need for non-conventional IP. For example, if you're a healthcare startup, you need access to patient data. Where's the patient data? Well, it's at the University of Miami Medical School, for example, which is the second largest public health system in the country right now. They have a lot of it, and they're willing to out-license it under certain conditions and non-exclusively. So I think the increase in the need for real-world data, software, AI, has been great for universities. They're becoming more willing to out-license those assets, and that's what the slide was showing. And it was not something I expected, but that's what the data shows.
Okay, so sorry, it's not your data, but just to probe into it, if you do know anything about it, I think it would be interesting. The data itself is driving the terms of the license, and therefore you can kind of slice it more thinly. Is that and be okay with lots of non-exclusive licenses? Is that the general?
That's what the data. Yeah, that's what the data is showing. So the Autumn went to different tech transfer offices and asked them what are the deals that they're doing, and so typically, patient data, for example, just sort of sat by the wayside and wasn't generating any income for the universities. And what they're doing is they're non-exclusively saying you can have access to it against certain economics coming back to the university. They're doing that with software as well. So that's great for them and great for the market because a lot of companies, healthcare companies, startups need access to that data.
Right, right. Okay, we're coming to the end of the first panel, but I wanted to chuck out or throw out a couple of things that occurred during the presentations. One was anti-stack provisions, which came up, and then I wasn't clear that you, Robert, and Trini were saying the same thing, but from different perspectives. And the second thing, to give you a bit of thinking room, was the question of who owns IP improvement. I think that was a question you raised, Robert, but it came up subsequently as well. And I wasn't sure what the resolution of those things was and whether you were all on the same page. Can we have a little chat about those two things?
Sure. So
yeah.
maybe Trini can start with her view, and I'll sort of chime in.
Yeah, Trini, I can't remember what you said about it, but it struck me it wasn't the same as what Robert was saying, and I'm sure there can be different views, but can we have that discussion?
I'm certain we are aligned at the end of the day.
Okay.
My comment is more than that a licensee, so a professor seeking to seek a license from the university or whoever it would be, should be aware that any stacking provisions would probably be coming from themselves because it's not naturally in the interest of the university, obviously. So if you do foresee that you need more access to more patent along the way until you get your product on market, then you can use that in the negotiations with the university in order to set a cap on how much royalty, either in percentages or in absolute numbers, how much royalty you should actually pay. So one thing is to put an anti-stack provision where you set limits to it. But the other thing is also, which we recently do in a research project we got from a Danish research institute, but we were depending on a patent coming from a Canadian university as well as a UK university. So here we had 3 patents. We needed to figure out how to deal with this. But then we opted in pooling it. So we agreed with the parties that it would be the UK entity dealing with the patent pool on behalf of all parties. So that's the alternative you can do there instead of the anti-stack provision. That is that you get the parties on board and you pool it and have one to manage it on behalf of the others.
So you pre-stack, in other words.
You can call it that, yes.
Yeah. Robert, that's the same position as you have, I guess.
Yeah,
this needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think we were saying the same things. And maybe if I can give a real life example. So right now, this is not related to Ambulera, but we're looking to in-license a biologic that has 3 pieces. And the university has the first piece. And we know that 2 other entities have IP rights on the second and third piece. So we're going to the university and saying, look, if we have to pay market economics for licenses for these other 2 pieces, the company is not going to be profitable and it's not going to survive. And so we're asking each of the IP owners, including you, university, to take a discount on the economics that come back to you. And initially, they don't like that because it affects their bottom line. But again, to get the innovation into the marketplace, into the arms of patients, all the licensors have to understand that the company has to make money or they won't get any investment. And it's typically, you know, they understand the discussion, and I found universities being very, very good at addressing anti-stack concerns of young companies.
Maybe just throw these 2 sentences for me, right? Because we looked at also some assets that we bought into the company, into BioNTech. And when we looked at the underlying license agreements that the company had with universities, for example, the royalties were quite high, right? So I think I just want to add to on what Robert and Trini said, that if the goal is to out-license the asset effectively, right? Or let's say you out-license an early stage, a research stage asset, you're not going to get royalties in a double digits, right? You're starting with a royalty range of 6, 7, 8, 9%. Now, take the example of a delivery platform that a university has, which is tremendous, right? And is great, and it asks for 4 or 5% royalty. Already there, you're kind of stuck, right? Because you have to transform this and put this into a product. There may be another royalty coming on top of that, and companies have to be very sensitive that, you know, what you want to do with the asset, and what the value is when they out-license it. Yeah, if it's a phase 2 clinical asset, it's certainly different than when they out-license early on. And the stacking provisions are absolutely key and crucial. And in the case that I just described, I mean, we had to, before bringing this asset in, we had to go back to the universities, explain to them what we try to do with it, what other IP would come into it, and renegotiate the royalties effectively to bring it down to a rate where something is left for us, right? Once we sell it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the pragmatic aspects are going to make that. It's just a question of how respectful, I guess, the various negotiating parties are of the need to get something done, rather than just have 15% of nothing.
Right. Right.
Maybe Danos, or are we running on time, or shall I?
Maybe we should continue the next panel if there are no other comments from you.
Okay, so
oh no, sorry, that we are on time. But if you want to take a little break, we can have 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm afraid of the break, but it's John, because, you know, people may be tired and
yeah, no, too much of me is going to make people tired. So if
we
we can continue straight on and force people, maybe Trini has a mechanism for forcing people to stay and listen to the session as well.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Well,
Too much of you can.
So thank you, Trini, Holger, Robert. Very useful, deeper dive into what you've been talking about earlier. I hope it was useful for the audience. But we need to move on. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
But don't leave us, because we are
yeah. So nobody should leave at this point.
Right. Thank you.
So let's move on to our second panel. I guess that's the idea, right?
Exactly.
So I'm going to welcome back John Cosmopoulos from Tufts, and then introduce 2 panelists that haven't given a talk. So Elena Andanova from the JRC, Joint Research Center, the Competence Center on Technology Transfer, particularly, and Spelestres, who is an EIC board member and head of the Technology Transfer and Innovation Center at the Josef Stefan Institute in Slovenia. Are we all online?
Yes, hi.
Hi there, John.
Hi, John.
So, given that we haven't heard from you, Elena, already, maybe you can quickly, briefly introduce yourself and the organization, and then we'll talk about some broader issues, and then I'll introduce Speller as well.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Can you hear me well, just to confirm?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, fantastic. So, yes, I'm part of the Competence Center on Technology Transfer at the European Commission's Joint Research Center. And here, what I have been doing in the past few years is really to help develop, support the development of ecosystems for technology transfer. And very much also working on what we call at the European Commission the innovation divide. So helping also communities in Eastern Europe, including the Western Balkans, to come up to speed with best practices when we talk about technology transfer. I've been focusing predominantly on two aspects. One is financing, and the other one is capacity building and skills creation, so to say, for innovation and TT. Beforehand, though, I spent quite a long time working for Oxford University's technology transfer firm. It's a company. And there I combined from one end pretty operational experience working on tech transfer projects, and also worked quite a lot with communities in other continents, including Latin America and Asia, trying also to bring some good practices, build up some capacities, often engaging with the British government as a funder to be able to do so. Before that, I started my career, that seems like very long time now ago, in investment banking in London.
Okay.
So that's about me, I guess.
Thank you, Elena. We'll come back to the innovation divide in a few moments, but first of all, if I can ask Bella Strace to introduce herself and your role at EIC and in Slovenia, please. Bella.
Hi, John. Very pleased to be here.
Pleased to have you.
As you said, I'm the head of the Innovation and Technology Transfer Center at Jože Stefan Institute in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Jože Stefan Institute is the largest research organization in Slovenia with 1,200 researchers, and it's named after a famous Slovenian scientist, obviously Jože Stefan, who was also a member of the Vienna Academy of Sciences. He was director of Vienna University, but together with his student Ludwig Boltzmann, he invented this Stefan Boltzmann's law of black body radiation. So we are very proud to be named after a famous physicist like this, because this is a basic physics law, as the Newton's laws. So as you said, my role in the EIC is being a board member. I'm very proud of that as well. I think it shows how passionate I am about making the innovation system more coherent and professional. During my professional life at the Jože Stefan Institute, I supported creation of numerous spin-out companies. We also created 2 proof of concept funds and several other national and regional financing support mechanisms. Originally I'm a physicist, so I've worked for Daisy, Hamburg. I hold a PhD in physics, so that's briefly about me.
Many of the best people in biotechnology and life sciences hold a PhD in physics, I believe. So thank you very much for those introductions. I mean, let's go straight into that innovation divide. And I want to bring John in as well on this, because I know that you, John, have worked not only at TUS, but also in connections in Europe and so forth. Do you see, let's deal with the kind of elephant in the room. Is there a difference between the US, what you see in the US and Europe in terms of technology transfer mechanisms? Is it something tangible that you can put your finger on, or is it something that varies from institution to institution? I expect you to say the latter through politeness.
Well, it's all the above, but also Europe itself is fairly heterogeneous. We've already sort of touched upon that. You know, there's more developed markets. You know, Elena worked in Oxford compared to the Western Balkans, and so that divide exists across the board. Exists probably in the U.S. as well. Technology transfer itself is a field that is not taught per se. I mean, all of its components. It's something you learn on the job. I think Robert, maybe Buchanan referred to that previously in a previous session, panel rather. So there is a divide. There's some universities tech transfer offices that that are more entrepreneurial than others, but generally, you know, there's a lot of efforts to bridge that divide. to learn from others, and adopt. I would say adopt best practices, but sort of develop best practices, or even discover best practices or new practices that can become best practices. It's always evolving. But the key thing is to think of tech transfer. I mean, to be business minded. Hopefully we're not bureaucrats. We have to operate on real world timelines. The previous panel, you talked about listening to the concerns of the companies, in particular around anti-stacking, but across the board, to close a deal, sort of both sides have to be listeners and doers.
Thank you, John. Spela or Elena, do you want to expand on the divide in Europe? John mentioned it briefly.
Yeah, well,
There's heterogeneous,
sure, John.
and let's move on to talking also about not just defining that divide, but defining or talking about how we can address it. What sort of mechanisms you're putting in place or need to be put in place to do that?
Well, I'll leave the mechanisms to Elena. I'll just comment on the difference between the EU and the US. We know that the EU has had an entrepreneurial growth, but we've also seen that the globally leading technology ventures are in a way hampered by a number of constraints versus the US example. So, as already mentioned, we have some regulatory constraints, and we're facing a fragmented market because obviously we have so many national institutions in so many 27 countries. It's difficult to keep it coherent. So we have these fragmented also stock markets with insufficient investments in some parts of Europe, although some parts might be seeing a bunch of liquidity coming in, but the other parts, as probably Elena also knows, the Balkans are an example of this part of the world that is lacking liquidity in stock markets. So this is also influencing the tech industries and the transfer to market from the public research organizations.
Yeah.
So there's some general economic barriers that are really outside of the control of anybody who's working in tech transfer. These are not translational issues in the sense they affect translation, but they're not something that tech transfer professionals can address directly.
As well, but it's obvious that our primary task is to transfer technologies and innovations from a public research organization to the economy. So all our activities are taking place in this respect, both by acquiring new cooperation with industry and by establishing spin-off companies. And this obviously incorporates activities as making market analysis, helping to protect and market intellectual property. But also there are internal issues on the organizational level. We know that transitioning from a scientific discovery to creating a globally competitive innovation actually requires a hands-on activity of an entrepreneur. And that entrepreneur should also be somehow connected to the research world, and they need to bridge from the university setting to a privately funded venture. So, because clearly only the privately funded ventures create the desired economic output. Yeah. So we need the seasoned entrepreneurs, and we need this, and we only have a really small fraction of scientists that are capable of doing that. And in addition to that, it's also the question of how mature the technology transfer environment actually is at a certain organization or in a certain country, and that's really heterogeneous again throughout the Europe.
Yeah, one question, if I may, that I've been pondering about is how do you do the technology transfer? And so you have a lot of initiatives. I'm presently sitting in Greece right now, And Greece in the last 12 months has made a very, and I'm sure it's similar to other countries in the region, have made a very large effort towards implementing technology transfer practices. They've done the legislative aspects. Most, if not all, the universities here have started technology transfer offices, at least on paper. Some are joint ventures. But then what's the next step? The next step is, in fact, you need to have policies, practices, and you need the people. So Spela was talking, what I hear her say is you need at least the starting point of the people, trained technology transfer people who will then sort of bridge. I mean, our role is to do bridges, find entrepreneurs or make connections. And so how do you find those? One idea would be to outsource the whole thing. I think Oxford would take it on, but then you're not building local capacity. And what you want to do is build local capacity who understand the local ecosystem and build the innovation ecosystem. So that's a short-term solution, or maybe it's a solution, but it's not long-term productive. But how do you? So this is a long way of saying, how do you do the technology transfer of technology transfer?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It's clear that that's going to be necessary, and I know. Just want to. Before I go to Elena with some detail on some of the mechanisms that we can look at, just put out the point there that partly because Danos will kill me if I don't mention licensing a bit more. I wonder whether the kind of fallback position of having a spin-out company as the primary option of intellectual property exploitation, which I think is possibly, I may be wrong about this, is in the mindset of many would-be European entrepreneurs. Is that obstructive to something that's actually more productive in terms of getting the research out into the public domain, or exploiting it, or whatever term you want to use? Because licensing probably in the end may be a more productive avenue. So there are two things there: resourcing the TTOs, and then if you don't resource the TTOs, the technology transfer organizations, can you really pursue the licensing option? Because I think that's the evidence seems to be that is a more productive way, although it might be more resource hungry from the university or the tech transfer organization point of view. Sorry, that was a really long and non-succinct question, but can we address those two things? The resource base, do we need to expand the effort that just goes into the technology transfer and translation process, and then we can look at licensing, or can we look at licensing before we expand that resource?
May I actually try to connect the three
yes, please.
elements
I'd
you
be very grateful if you would.
Because I think they're pretty connected, and I'll go a step back when you mention or ask us about the cultural divergence and where it's stemming from, where we can have also institutions with different practices. And I was just thinking about, for example, Oxford and Cambridge. They're very different in the way they operate in the TT system. And partially this stems from the fact that one is a top medical school and the other is a top computing engineering school. So the rule of thumb in Oxford is licensing. We already heard today that there are trends now in the biotech field and so on. But still, when you look at what Oxford's doing, 90% of their tech transfer activity is based on licensing. Cambridge is the other way around. Probably around 90% is on spinning out companies. So, but going back
Sorry, just Elena, is that just because it's simpler to do licensing in the kind of software and tech environment versus a life science environment?
I think that actually in medical sciences generally, it's way more resourceful to build a company from scratch. So the way that they look at it in Oxford is that, licensing is really the fastest way, not always, but if we speak as a trend, the fastest way to get those innovations to market, right? Because there is a difference between licensing into an existing company or a new company, which will be basically a spin out. The existing company already has the production facilities. They already have the marketing channels, the promotional and regulatory capabilities and so on. So that was the way of thinking. But I here want to mention as well that it's not just based on the sector. Okay, there are other decisions that have to be taken into account, whether you can afford to do a spin out or whether you can even afford to put resources into a licensing approach. It shouldn't be seen as if licensing is definitely the low-hanging fruit. Sometimes I've seen examples. There was a beautiful technology which is related to the what they call the NIP, the prenatal test for Down syndrome, right, which was discovered in Oxford. It took close to 10 years to license. I mean, it's unbelievable. And finally, once they licensed this to a Californian biotechnology company called Sequenom, you know, we already had like 5 infringers on the market. So a lawsuit started and so on and so on, because it was a great technology with a huge, you know, potential to generate revenues. But going back to my point, it's not necessarily that it's gonna take much faster time or resources to license, but generally licensing, you know, will take you, have the potential to take you to the market faster or smoother, if you like. And the risk is lower because, I mean, if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. You're not going to get revenues, but you invest in a spin out, right, as a university. So more resources, more effort in fundraising, more effort in finding CEO,
Right.
building the whole community around the new company. But I will, because I'm sure that the other colleagues will have something to say on that, I'll just go back, if you don't mind, to the innovation
Yeah, quickly go back, and then
unless
we'll
you
bring the
want me
guys in.
to say a few words later. So in my work here, especially the Commission, I have been dealing a lot with these issues, with differences in culture and approaches between the more developed tech transfer ecosystems and, let's say, the less developed. And I think that the other John already touched about, you know, the importance of building local capacities. This is what we are exactly trying to do. We're trying to promote best practices. And this doesn't mean necessarily, you know, holding the hand of the researchers, TTOs, and universities in transiting, let's say, economies and countries, but it's more about really showing them what are the best practices and then letting them to choose these. So how do we do that? We do it, for example, with very practical projects. Recently, we have completed a proof of concept scheme where 47 tech transfer projects, really science-based projects from the Western Balkans, received support. And, you know, it was already mentioned, indeed, the best way to build capacity is via learning. But there are also other mechanisms. What, for example, now we are seeing that is lacking is more networks that will bring good scientific, what we call pockets of excellence in the region. Let's say if you look at Eastern or Southeast Europe, with other places of excellence, let's say in very developed tech transfer communities. And here we can also consider ways to encourage the pooling of IP. I have seen a beautiful example there where we had an IP from the University of Malta put together with IP from the University of Manchester to make a really unique antenna, which is now used in the Square kilometer array project. Probably you heard it's a big radio astronomy scientific project. So these are the sort of the mechanisms that we have to consider more in a detail. And then the other, just to finalize my point, I mean, we are here at an event of the European Innovation Council and AISMER, and what I'm seeing is that there are not many projects from Southeast Europe, for example, that are getting to get this support, financial support. So clearly they are good projects that we are seeing on the ground, but clearly there is also something missing in the capacities, how you promote, how you pitch this soft business side, so those entrepreneurs and researchers in the east, you know, of Europe can actually have the same opportunities when they have excellent research and excellent projects that are their peers from the more developed communities. So this is also something to consider.
Yeah, no, I think I'm sure that will be part of the ongoing discussion with EIC about kind of evening up the background support.
John, I have.
Yeah, go ahead, Svez.
Yeah, thank you. So, Elena, thank you for mentioning the geographical issues also within the EIC allocation of funding. It could be the fact that there are innovations of business skills, as you said, that they are less developed. It could be that it's simply our English accent that does not suit the evaluators in a way, or there could be even some geographical bias. We are at the board, we are determined to find out where the reasons for this mismatch are and to take steps to improve it. But if I go again a step back, you were discussing the licensing as a fallback position to spin out creation, and Cambridge and Oxford were mentioned. They might be different due to the sectors they cover, or to how much they wish or they can afford to invest into their technology transfer processes. Yeah. But we need not to forget that again here there are different economical environment cultures in different parts of Europe, and this connects with the geographical issue that Elena put forward. There's a difference in not only between the spin-out creation and the licensing parts, but also there's a difference between the licensing and the contract research parts, because in some parts of Europe, licensing and patent sales is crucial as a vehicle to the market, and contract research is viewed as a mere service. Sometimes it's even considered below the level of a seasoned researcher. But in some other parts, contract research is the main way of collaborating with the industry. It depends a lot on the technological absorption capacity of the industrial players in the country or the region. So in some countries, even all manners of collaboration are viewed as important. And
yeah, but I guess the industrial base varies from country to country quite a lot.
Yeah, it's very much depending on what the economical players in the region request. So it's not just the choice of the public research organizations, but it also very much depends on the technological capacity of the companies. And in our case, the scientific excellence of researchers in Slovenia is undisputed. It translates into the 135% of the average European top 5% cited articles. But that does not simply translate to technological transfer excellence, because there is a specificity in the technological capacity of the companies. So licensing is a very special tool and needs to be used in specific environments to the benefit of economy and the researchers.
I wanted John to jump in here, if I may just sort of interrupt you, just to sort of circle back and let's close a loop on the terminology, because we talk about licensing versus startups, and to remind ourselves and remind everyone, I think what we mean when we're saying licensing, we're just talking about the channels. So are we doing a deal with an existing company or with a startup? Because ultimately, there will be a license with a startup as well. The license is just that tool, the agreement, and what name it has on it. It's a a license. Going back to Robert's comment, maybe non-exclusive or exclusive, but every transaction, I mean, most transactions will have a license. But the question is, for example, with the prenatal test, do you bring it to market through an existing company, or through or do you at least go through an intermediate step of a startup company, which may continue or may have an exit after 2-3 years and be sold to a larger company. But I think that's the terminology.
A good important distinction to retain. And the point is, you may end up getting to the same place. In fact, your intermediate startup company may subsequently sub-license or license again to a bigger company, which is always going to be the one that will take that kind of product to the market.
Yeah,
so the question is,
exactly.
Do you bother with the resource of creating a separate company to do that?
You might have to because you may have to de-risk the technology, and then ultimately, and then you know the larger company will come in once it's de-risked, and they prefer to pay more, but for a de-risk technology rather than going in earlier, or you know it can go all the above. I think startup companies used to be used more often in sort of less developed technology transfer environments, if you wish, because in sort of in those environments. When people use the term startup, they were thinking of a straight assignment because there wasn't the capacity to do like a complicated license agreement or to monitor a license agreement. You know, if you want to get paid, you have to do audits. You have to make sure you get the reports, make sure, you know, there's made reference before that there's, you know, diligence performance milestones that they have to meet. If not, you pull back the IP. And if you don't have that capacity, then it's simpler to do like a one-time transaction. You sell the asset entirely, you get X in equity. And it's one-dimensional, but it might work. It might not work, but it solves the problem of not having the internal capacity to track the deals.
So the question is, do we have, sorry, I just want to ask this question in a particular way. Do we need a clearinghouse in the same way that Trini Bertoldi's BII seems to be some sort of clearinghouse for a broad capture of intellectual property, let's say, and then presumably experience in the out licensing, contacts with networks, you know, contacts into existing networks and so forth, that goes beyond what an individual institute's
good point. But by clearinghouse, I think perhaps you mean hub. If you mean hub, I agree entirely. Like
I guess hub, yes.
Yeah.
I guess clearinghouse has a particular financial connotation that.
Yeah, it could be that a place the size of, you know, like a smaller Western Balkan country, you know, like maybe Slovenia only needs 1 or 2 tech transfer offices. I don't, that's just a question, or Greece may only need a few like that. Certainly in Athens, I think 3 or 4 or 5 institutions have come together in this sort of new model of tech transfer, and they formed one larger tech transfer office. And so, yeah, I think hubs would be great ideas, personally.
I actually wouldn't necessarily link it to the size of the economy or the country, because we also have good examples of models like that, like for example in France with their SAT, what they call system, where tech transfer support to research organizations in universities is very centralized. And they run this hub and spoke model on a country basis in a country like France. But also going back to what John mentioned on the preference of less developed economy, so to say, to go for the startup, to take the startup route, I think it also has to do, and I think he touched on it, with some bad practices that are being deployed, whether because they're lacking institutional capacities or because their TTOs are lacking or they're dysfunctional. But what we're seeing very often is that researchers would just pressure the let's say the university rector to assign the intellectual property to them, and then basically will do a deal, what we call under the table, meaning they will want to go and make a company on their own. And what usually happens is that they face all the challenges in terms of patent cost, not being able to raise the funds. They try to raise funds from family and friends, and very often they're not successful with these projects, even if the technology has had a good potential and a potential for international patent and so on. And this is a situation where it becomes not a win-win, but rather a lose-lose situation.
It seems to be the case that those kind of mechanisms are eventually obstructive, even though they might, tick a box, allow you to complete an assessment that says we have this spin out and that spin out, but that's not the way to assess successful translation.
Definitely. And just last point on that, what we're seeing also in communities, I've seen that in Latin America, but also in Eastern Europe, is unfortunately for licensing to be promoted and why they're actually taking very often this spin-out route, even if they have established TTO and so on, even if it costs them more to do, is because they don't feel that they have access to the companies. Very often when the economies are smaller, they have to out-license abroad. And, you know, they don't have this culture or even capacity. Maybe this is something that we have to have here at the European Commission level to approach, you know, the blue chip companies so that they can look at their invention. And of course, you know, if you're working at Oxford University, you pick up the call, you phone, I don't know, Rolls-Royce, you know, they will respond to you immediately. There is a gap when you're calling, I don't know, from the University of Belgrade. So, but equally, the technology might be fantastic. So putting these barriers down, I think, will be also very important. Probably policy initiative in Europe, knowing the environment and in Europe and how dependent it is on policy intervention.
But Elena, there's always a nationalism involved, and this is one of the things that you know is very clear from the Worldview survey. But you know, everybody's first licensing deal is with the pharmaceutical company down the road. Is a tendency even in the US.
Yeah, just you know, everyone has to deal with that. There's an old adage. The former director of the MIT TLO office was asked some years ago, "How does the office do its marketing?" And the response was, "Oh, we answer the phone." And I can assure, and that's their marketing. They just have to make sure when it rings, they pick it up. And I can assure you that my office is not that far from the MIT TLO's office, and that's not how I do marketing. So I have to work a little bit harder. But I have a question for you, Elena, and maybe it's for other people on this. So you talked about some of the JRC's programs. I heard sort of proof of concepts. Schemes or programs. Do you have anything around professional development more deeply, you know, I don't know, exchange programs? In the past, we've been approached and we've hosted tech transfer professionals. South Africa, in sort of the previous decade, was trying to develop its tech transfer environment very actively, and so they sent a number of people abroad. We had someone for, I forget, a month or two, and she would shadow us, and that's, you know, that's one way of learning. She'd sit on meetings, and then we would invest some time to tell her why we did X or Y or Z, or didn't do X or Y or Z. Are there those kinds of programs that you know about?
That's actually an excellent question. I think that there should be more from the Commission's perspective, but I've had the pleasure to participate in programs like that back in my Oxford days. So, for example, we were working a lot with the British government, but also via some European programs. We had cohorts of researchers coming and also us going, including South Africa and Stellenbosch University, I remember. But there were programs, for example, the one very nice program was the Leaders in Innovation Fellowship, where we had entrepreneurs and researchers from India, from Brazil, from South Africa, Mexico, just to name a few countries. And, you know, they were coming with their science and their projects. But what they were lacking was the access, of course, to networks, which would open for them. They were lacking also the soft skills, how to pitch. They were lacking also knowledge on the commercialization process. So we were training them. So these were form of secondments. Now, at the Commission level, at the Competence Center of Technology Transfer here, we haven't had a program like that so far. But what we have tried to do in terms of human capital development, what you mentioned, is to build what we call a community of practice for Southeast Europe, where we have, I think, over 2,000 people registered who are regularly, you know, participating in workshops, in meetings, and their conferences annually or biannually, where we also try to promote very active training on the ground. But again, in terms of pure secondments, I think this is something that probably, again, the European Commission can have a role to play to facilitate and maybe help with some of the resources and the funding where such exchanges can start taking place. And I think that with the new communication on innovation, already programs like that are envisaged going forward.
Yeah, I agree. The other idea I might sort of throw out there is sort of partnering ideas.
Can you let Spella come in on that?
Sure.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I was just trying to emphasize that I totally agree with Elena that training the researchers to be able to respond themselves and play an active role is of a very high importance. But
you think it should be the tech transfer professionals who do the training?
To have a high quality professional innovation management support.
Right.
So if we discuss the professionalization of innovation management support, which is highly needed still in Europe, I would like to put forward that the EIC is proactively supporting its projects and startups already. So the important role is played by the program managers and the business acceleration services, and on the other hand side, we have a proof of concept ERC or a pathfinder beneficiary that might need more the support of a technology transfer professional to help look into the technology transfer pathways on the site, on where the research is taking place, to support also the actions for proper valorization there immediately and all the time. So we need this entrepreneurial knowledge transfer offices, technology transfer offices across Europe. And the current situation about the knowledge transfer offices is really, as I said before, geographically heterogeneous and could be improved because the knowledge transfer offices are a crucial element in the this early stage in a support environment, but they're still in parts they're understaffed or administrative, or we have people that are too focused on the legal issues instead of actually supporting the innovation process. So I was very curious to hear the initial question of how to do tech transfer. And I think the technology transfer community in Europe is rather open to sharing experiences, but of course also with the GRC and through the EIC, things can be always improved, in particular for the Eastern and the Southeastern Europe.
No, I think the technology transfer of the technology transfer is going to be one of the takeaway messages from this whole day. I think it sounds important and it sounds something that's addressable, and maybe it has to address the idea that even technology transfer itself is a dynamic process that needs to be looked at. I see Danis has popped onto the, he's listening in for sure, which is probably my signal to say thank you to all our panelists, to John, to Elena and Spella, for a very interesting discussion. I believe we're transitioning into a final Q&A, but thank you again, all the panelists.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you, John.
Danos, do we go back to you now?
Danos, you're muted.
I'm sorry, yes. I hope nobody disagrees with the charismatic chair of the panels that we had. And thank you so much, John, for chairing the two panels. Yes, let's have a few minutes of questions from the panel, and then we go to the closing remarks. So Robert or Max, who is asking?
Sure. So if you see an interesting question as well, John, don't hesitate to jump in. But maybe the first one, there was a comment from Chris, if she's still here with us. I don't know.
She's with us. She's with us. Chris, could you please?
It's a very specific question.
I mean, I just saw this startup 2 days ago that is trying to do a different way of commercialization. I don't know if you are familiar with that. I find it interesting. It's a different way to fund research directly between corporates.
What's the mechanism, Chris?
Yeah,
briefly?
if you look at the website, I just put it there as an interesting thing to look at.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
Always very brief. Chris, next question, please.
So the question is, has licensing sped up over the last year? If so, will this trend continue, or will we see rather overregulation? So is the question, is there more licensing activity, or are deals being closed more quickly? I will say that over the last 2 years, I've been surprised that there's, a lot of licensing activity. I think people had to stay home and they started thinking of new ventures, and they decided to, or they want to start companies. If they're going to be locked up, they might as well do something. So, so I'll answer sort of that question. That aspect of the question.
Next one is for Holger, or has license?
There's one for John Hodgson as well.
Do I think the behavioral aspects influence the markets in Europe compared to the US?
I think that question came especially up because I think during both panels you talked a lot about the old and the new world, and how it is. I think if it is more risk-taking, the US compared to Europe, and how this could influence the dynamics.
Well, I think this is quite an old discussion, but I think there are differences, and when I first worked for Nature Biotechnology, it surprised me the assumptions that my colleagues made about the commercial awareness of the research base. This was in the 90s, by the way, because I knew nothing of commercial realities. And I assumed that most researchers didn't either, but apparently that wasn't the case in the US. I think the other big factor here is the nature of the financial markets that pull projects towards expansion. I think the fragmented market in Europe is a big influence, fragmented financial market. And it sounds like it's a fragmented market in technology transfer and recognition of, who's a potential partner. And, despite the EU, which unfortunately the UK isn't in anymore, we don't have a single market. We don't have single markets in most commercial activities. They're somewhat smoothed, but not entirely so.
Very correct. Very correct. Next one, Max.
There was one question as well, maybe in that context, just to stay in the same area. If there was a discussion as well from Spela and Elena. So one participant asked, should we invest more in Eastern Europe? And I think what they're referring to is especially Estonia, which has shown some improvements in their development. So especially like if Spela or Elena have some thoughts on this, or the people from the US.
I'll just share. I'll just share in one sentence information. So the European Investment Fund, the EIF, has in the past 5 years created more than 40 different university-based funds all over the Europe, and none of them was in Southeastern Europe. So the first one to be created is only to be created this year, hopefully by the end of the year, and it's going to be a Slovenian-Croatian joint technology transfer fund, a proof of concept fund. But that gives you an information of how much of proof of concept funding or of venture financing is available for us there. So this is a direct answer to the question, if is it needed? Go ahead, Elena.
I will just quickly add, because Spela nicely focus on the actual financial investment, but I would like to note that at least at Commission level at the moment, we're starting to invest more in operational capacities, if you like, working closely with certain governments in Eastern Europe to improve the tech transfer governance systems in the countries. For example, we are now, working with Croatia, Romania, as well as Bulgaria, and hopefully other countries will follow soon. But the idea is to also make investments, not just, as you know, the Commission is providing funds for investment in actual research infrastructure, but also to provide investment in what we call soft capacities and helping them to build really sustainable tech transfer capabilities and offices, and not only, as somebody mentioned before, tech transfer offices on paper. So this is also happening, but I agree with Spela, we are far behind.
Perhaps we take 2 more questions because everybody's tired. Max?
Okay, sure. We have one question as well, which is on reproducibility. And I think that question came in the time when we talked about Holger and that we see more investments already on the preclinical results already. So we saw, for example, what happened to Theranos, which is of course an extreme example, but for those of you, and let's keep it an open question because I think it concerns both panels. What is the trust in early technology? Is it necessary, and how do we ensure investment in such early stages?
I think for us, maybe just a short answer is, I mean, when we look at new technologies, and often it comes with high claims, often also published data. I mean, we like to reproduce it, and have a quick evaluation phase. Basically, it could be seen as an evaluation option agreement. When the data is there, we then have an exclusive option to license where the terms effectively are already preset. So that's kind of what we like to do.
I concur that, like, from our perspective, we pay $30,000 to have external vendor to reproduce the results. And if it comes back okay, then they get funding. It's very simple.
Very good. Next one,
Very
please.
interesting. And so let's see how much time it interests we
Just
still
one
have.
question, Max, and then I'll close, please.
Perfect. So what happened with the entrepreneurs non-bounded to universities? Will the knowledge transfer offices in Europe be open to support them as well? Who wants to take that?
Well, I suppose it depends on the remit of those offices. Are they who's the client? Is the client the university and the university's researchers? In that case, then they wouldn't be working with anyone else. But they may be mandated or funded to operate differently and operate as sort of knowledge transfer centers. They may be hosted at the University of Place X, University X, but they may be mandated to help entrepreneurs and sort of knowledge transfer, tech transfer more broadly. That, I guess, depends on the programs.
Thank you, John. I think we can really stop here, and I would very much, I want to really thank, first of all the people that they stayed after 4 hours. We still have 50 people with us. This is amazing. We had 70 people listening at 3 hours, so we're grateful for that. Second, of course, all the speakers, all the panelists, and a very big thanks to John. Allow me 1 minute to some takeaway messages from us, and especially for the Pathfinder instrument and the transition instrument. Some of the things I heard from Jorgil, and that was really impressive, that we are very much science driven. We've been discussing with that from the beginning with my colleague Keith Sikura, that everything can be fixed, but not the poor quality silence. So from a leading company to confirm that is quite reassuring. Also, he said, let's buy it. I mean, I would also add, let's in-license their technology, and that should be a message, encouraging message for especially our Pathfinder and transition company. Then it was, if I remember correctly, Elena's comment about license is the fastest way, right? I would also I agree, but also perhaps also the most effective way, and that is what is very important here. John talked about this technology transfer of the technology transfer, right? That's indeed very interesting. I would say to John, because we are coming from the same country, that if you see, for instance, what Pfizer did in Greece, they launched a new, but when I looked at that, is again analysis data, and they didn't, launch a new wet lab, I would say, and that is something of concern for all the Eastern. I mean, what is the reason that you're not attracting also wet lab, and most of that always go to Switzerland? I mean, and that I would tie up that with Spella's comment, and yes, it's a geographical, yes, it's also a cultural thing, but perhaps licensing is also part of training, and that's why I'm grateful to all of you that you've been here. All what our beneficiaries, they have listened is that today from you is that it can be done. One thing is to call you for training. Another thing is to try to make you understand that it is for the more developed countries. But if you want to get into this competition, this elite, you should learn, and that's your future, is about licensing. And it takes all the components I described. And I don't want to take more time. And yes, I would like to thank again everybody for your participation, and hope to see you soon in another event. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great workshop.
Bye.
Thank you.